Sergeants, we're live.
Thank you and good morning. And at this time, will sergeants please start their recordings? PC recording has started.
Call recording has started as well.
Thank you. And good morning and welcome to today's New York City Council hearing on cultural affairs, libraries, and international intergroup relations. At this time, would all council members and council staff please turn on their video? To minimize disruption, please place electronic devices on vibrate or silent mode. If you wish to submit testimony, you may do so at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Once again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. We are ready to begin.
Good morning and welcome to our oversight hearing on expanding access to cultural institutions for underserved BIPOC youth and the BIPOC community at large. It isn't every morning that you get to see a gavel on a virtual hearing, so that was very fun to do that just now. My name is Councilmember Chi Osei. I am the chair of the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations, and I would like to thank everyone for being part of this important hearing. Today, we're here to learn about what DCLA and cultural institutions are doing to support efforts to expand access and promote engagement to cultural institutions for underserved BIPOC youth, the BIPOC community at large, and how the council may better support these efforts. We know the arts are among the most impactful ways to affect social change, explore racial and ethnic representations, and reflect a community's history and identity while providing an opportunity to engage diverse audiences in learning. And we also know that encouraging and supporting the arts and culture community is important because of its ability to amplify diverse voices, which in turn enables creativity and problem solving in all areas. Exposure to arts and culture helps both individuals and organizations produce better outcomes and results. While culturally diverse Black, Indigenous, people of color, and their communities in New York City represent and provide an important voice in the city's arts and cultural sector, they often continue to face numerous disparities and barriers to equity and equality. A 2019 DCLA study found that in New York City, staff at cultural institutions are on average 38% people of color and 62% white, non-Hispanic. In contrast, US Census data shows 67% of New York City's population identifies as BIPOC and 33% white, non-Hispanic. This data also revealed a disproportionate representation by pay grade and position, where positions such as curator were primarily held by individuals identifying as white, while the jobs within cultural institutions with the fewest white workers were primarily in maintenance and security. Advocates assert that the COVID-19 pandemic has made such gender, racial, and economic disparities even worse overall. And research shows that minority and immigrant-serving arts organizations in New York City have been the hardest hit by the pandemic. Today, more than ever before, it's vital that our BIPOC youth and communities are ensured access to our arts and cultural institutions. Today, we look forward to hearing from Deputy Commissioner Feinberg about the administration's commitment to accessible and diverse programming, and to hear from the advocates and other interested stakeholders. I would also like to thank the community members, artists, advocates, and program staff who have joined us today. We are grateful for your partnership and look forward to learning how we can better support you. Before I turn to our moderator to read the oath, I would like to thank my staff, my legislative director and budget director, May Vutrapong Batana, as well as my chief of staff, Naomi Hopkins, as well as our committee staff, Brenda McKinney, who is our committee counsel, Christy Dwyer, who is our legislative policy analyst, and Aaliyah Ali, principal financial analyst. And I would also like to acknowledge my colleagues that are here on this hearing: Councilmember Dinowitz, Councilmember Farias, Councilmember Hanif, Councilmember Hudson, Councilmember Joseph, Councilmember Lewis, and Councilmember Ung. Without further ado, I'll now turn it over to our hearing moderator, Christy Dwyer. Christy?
Thank you so much, Chair, and welcome everybody to our first hearing this session. I want to introduce myself. I'm Christy Dwyer, the Legislative Policy Analyst for the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations of the New York City Council, and I have the honor of moderating today's hearing. Before we begin, I want to go over a few procedural matters. The chair and I will be calling on panelists to testify, and I want to remind everyone that you will be on mute until you're called, and then you will be unmuted by the host. So please listen for your name. For everyone testifying today, please note that there may be a few seconds of delay before you are unmuted, and we thank you in advance for your patience. At today's hearing, the first panel will be the administration, followed by council member questions, and then the public will testify. During the hearing, if council members would like to ask a question, please use the Zoom raise hand function and you will be called on in order. I'm now going to call on the member of the administration to testify who's with us today. That would be Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Cultural Affairs, Sheila Feinberg. I know we had a bit of technical difficulty, so let me just double check and make sure that Deputy Commissioner is available.
I'm here.
Great, thank you so much. I will first read the oath, and after I will call on each panelist from the I'm sorry, I will call on you to respond. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and respond honestly to council member questions? Deputy Commissioner Feinberg?
I do.
Thank you so much. And you may begin when ready.
Great. And thank you, everybody. Apologies for the technical issues on my end. Good morning, Chair Osei. I am Sheila Feinberg, Deputy Commissioner for the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, here to testify in regards to today's topic, oversight, expanding access to cultural institutions for underserved BIPOC youth and BIPOC community at large. I'd like to acknowledge your first hearing as chair of this committee. It's a remarkable post from which to observe and support our city's cultural community. We're also excited to work with all the new members of this committee who are here joining us today. We like to collaborate with you all because we feel it's very important for the cultural sector that we all work well together, and we look forward to continuing to do so in the months and years ahead. New York's cultural community is a source of strength, vitality, and value for residents in every corner of our city. That's why it's essential that we make sure the cultural sector reflects, represents, and speaks to all New Yorkers. A diverse cultural community is one that creates programming which connects with all residents and uplifts all communities. This is particularly true for our city's youth, where meaningful engagement with creative expression and arts educators can be life-changing. Fostering more equitable opportunities for these connections for all residents, particularly communities of color and other marginalized groups, is something we've worked towards with many partners across the sector for many years. These efforts to foster greater equity are built on advocacy and reform work stretching back decades. Early on, these movements helped establish some of our city's first culturally specific organizations, like Studio Museum and El Museo del Barrio. We are proud to build on these foundations today as we work with cultural advocates and organizers around the city. Starting in 2015, our agency launched a major new initiative to center diversity, equity, and inclusion in our work. When we commissioned a report which found that in a city where 2/3 of residents identified as people of color, just 1/3 of our cultural workforce did, it sounded the alarm for urgent collective action. The Create NYC Cultural Plan, released in 2017, integrated this sense of urgency into a broader roadmap for fostering a more diverse cultural community. To accomplish these goals, we've made major investments and created new programs to drive attention, funding, and action when it comes to creating a cultural sector as diverse as our vibrant city. I'd like to run through just a representative group of these efforts. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, as I just mentioned, there's a lot of work that we've been doing in this. Working with the Cultural Institutions Group, we mandated diversity, equity, and inclusion plans from all 34 members, among the first plans of their kind for cultural organizations in the US. Our staff continues to work with groups to evaluate and implement these plans. which have opened up new opportunities for people of color and other workers from marginalized communities. Increased investments in cultural groups working in, serving, and led by communities of color. Through our work with the Social Impact for the Arts of the Arts Project, we call it SIAP, and the city's Task Force for Racial Inclusion and Equity, we identified neighborhoods around the city where increased funding will support cultural programs proven to increase social well-being and lower resource communities. In the current fiscal year, this increase included more than $5 million supporting over 650 groups citywide. New dedicated grant programs like the Language Access Fund, Disability Forward Fund encouraged and invested in cultural programs that generated new opportunities for marginalized groups to engage with the arts. Through the city's Theater Sub-District Council, we further invested in diversity programs to open jobs and opportunities in our city's incredible theater community. There tends to be a significant overlap between smaller groups and BIPOC organizations. Altogether, over 500 Cultural Development Fund recipient organizations have budgets under $250,000, half of the grantee pool. This year, in addition to the increased funding for organizations serving communities of color mentioned previously, we have also moved forward with reforms and efforts to make CDF funding more equitable. These include expanding multi-year funding to all grantees to provide greater predictability and stability and support, streamlining the CDF application, and recruiting panelists that are representative of our city's diverse population, and finally, incorporating equity in CDF priorities and criteria for funding. We've also broken DEI a little bit into workforce development efforts, and we've expanded the pipeline for diverse talent into jobs in the cultural sector. We created the CUNY Cultural Corps so students could get paid to explore careers in arts and culture. More than 600 students have gone through the program and worked at dozens of cultural organizations in all 5 boroughs since it was launched. Arts education. Arts educators are powerful agents for connecting our youth with arts education opportunities, and our COVID surveys found that these workers had been laid off and furloughed at incredibly high rates. For the past 2 years, we've added funding to organizations providing arts education programming across the city. We've also replenished funding for the New York City Arts and Education Roundtables Relief Fund for arts educators, giving a lifeline to these important cultural workers. We also work very closely with our partners at the Department of Education, and in particular in the Office of Arts and Special Projects, making sure that New York City youth have opportunities to engage with art and culture, both in the classroom and beyond. It is essential to the education of our children and the long-term health and vitality of our cultural community. According to the most recent Arts in Schools report, 100% of DOE high school students met the state recommended minimum of 2 credits in the arts prior to graduation. While this is an achievement in itself, we know that we can go deeper. Our partners in the cultural sector share a commitment to engaging youth, and many of DCLA's grantees have partnerships with New York City Public Schools. At least 417 cultural arts organizations were partnered with schools to provide arts education and instruction. Community partner work. DCLA is proud to support community-led efforts to highlight and advocate for organizations of color around the city. For instance, Hugh Arts NYC, which just launched last week, includes a digital map and directory featuring more than 400 POC arts entities serving New York City neighborhoods. This effort, led by the Laundromat Project, Museum Hugh, and Hester Street, will help everyone to better see, understand, and support the essential role these organizations play in their communities. As we continue our recovery from the pandemic and imagine together what we want our new normal to look like, efforts like this are crucial to making informed, impactful policy decisions. COVID relief. DCLA conducted 2 major surveys of the impact of COVID on our city's cultural community. A report from Center for an Urban Future based on our survey data found that BIPOC-led organizations were more likely to report a severe financial impact from the pandemic, less likely to be confident in their long-term survival, and twice as likely to report that their entire staff was still laid off or furloughed. These surveys provided a baseline understanding of the pandemic's impact on arts groups of color, allowing relief funding and other assistance to be invested where it was needed most. At DCLA, we also used it to increase funding for hardest hit groups, including those working in neighborhoods called out by the city's Task Force for Racial Inclusion and Equity. Knowing the pandemic's disproportionate impact on communities of color, we have also built support for these residents into other agency programs. The City Artists Corps, for instance, provided relief grants to over 3,000 artists citywide in exchange for public programming. Working with New York Foundation for the Arts and local partners, Artists Corps awards were weighted to aid those most affected by COVID-19, factoring in income, COVID-impacted zip codes, and disability. The artists who receive support reflect this dedication to investing in these groups. 56% of grantees were women or gender nonconforming individuals, and 72% were people of color. Another key source of support for programs that expand access for youth, communities of color, and other historically marginalized groups is our partnership with you, the City Council. In the current fiscal year, more than 25 million in council initiatives are supporting programs such as the Cultural After-School Adventures, which is providing nearly $15 million to over 150 groups for a range of after-school programming, and Coalition of Theaters of Color, which is providing over $5 million for 65 performing arts organizations of color. The work of creating a cultural sector that better speaks to and reflects our beautiful city has been ongoing for generations. It's something we're committed to both building on and laying the framework for future generations to continue working on. Making sure that young people from our communities of color are welcomed into our city's creative life is our collective responsibility. We look forward to collaborating with you, Chair Osei, your colleagues on the council, and partners across the city to continue this essential work. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Feinberg. We appreciate your testimony. And now we'll turn to Chair Osei for any questions he may have for you.
Thank you, Ms. Dwyer, and thank you, Deputy Commissioner Feinberg. I also do want to acknowledge my colleague, Councilmember Brewer. And now for our questions. Deputy Commissioner Feinberg, we'd like to explore how accessible and inviting our cultural institutions are for our BIPOC youth and the BIPOC community at large. With that in mind, what do you see as the biggest barriers to providing access to arts and culture for underserved BIPOC communities?
I think always the greatest barrier, quite honestly, is education of the institutions and making sure that people, I guess there's different barriers, but one could be just knowing where the institutions are, which where I think the Hue Arts, that new work that's happening of mapping it out, I think is really helpful. I think sometimes there's a challenge, and part of that is also just visibility and sometimes marketing. And then the other part of it is also just, you know, quite frankly, art, while it's meaningful and moving, everybody experiences it differently. And I think sometimes some people can get turned off by one form of art and they don't go to another form. But art in itself, whether it's music or dance or visual arts, photography, painting, there's always something for everyone. And I think it's making sure people have access to all of it so that they find which resonates the most for them individually. Whether that's a 5-year-old still learning how to paint, or someone in high school that's really getting into sculpture and dance, or whether that's a young adult that's coming into the city for the first time to visit these cultural institutions.
Right, and what is DCLA doing specifically to combat these barriers?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing that we do is we provide funding to a lot, as I, in my testimony, articulated, you know, we provide a lot of funding to both small nonprofits that are in the community, small BIPOC-led arts organizations that are more embedded in the communities, and then also to the larger institutions. That's how we try to get at it. We also do work by making things publicly available on our website, and we partner with a lot of arts organizations with, as we mentioned, New York City DOE and other places so that the information is getting out there. I'll also add, we partner with IDNYC so that anyone that gets, you know, an IDNYC card also has access to some of these institutions for free.
I also did want to follow up and ask, has DCLA partnered with other agencies to ensure accessibility for all? If so, would you be able to describe how you have?
Well, the biggest partnership we have in terms of accessibility would be with the IDNYC program, which is where we partner with them to allow access to arts institutions throughout the city. That's one city partnership. A lot of our other city partnerships are really more on a model of funding, like the DOE. We provide funding to NYCHA through the City Corps program. We work with the Department of Sanitation and other agencies on our public arts and residence program to launch art. But that's not necessarily speaking to youth and making sure youth can access museums. Those are other interagency partnerships that we have.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
And for my next question, specifically and programmatically, in what ways does DCLA support BIPOC youth in arts and cultural organizations?
Again, we do it through our funding. We fund organizations that serve directly BIPOC youth.
And this is kind of a straightforward question, but what is the role of the city in strengthening opportunities and support for the BIPOC youth in the artistic community?
I think it's the same. It's providing support to the organizations that are actually on the ground doing the work in the communities, and that's sometimes it's technical assistance support, it's capacity building support, sometimes it's strictly resources.
And would you be able to go into what are some examples of its greatest strengths or successes?
I think, sure. I think some of the greatest strengths is that, we're, as was articulated in the testimony, like we've really taken on this DEI work wholeheartedly. It's embedded throughout the agency right now, which means it's embedded through all of the work that we do with our agency partners. And it's embedded with all the groups that we fund, whether that's a CIG or if that's a group that applies for competitive funding from us. It's embedded in the process. I'd say that's our greatest success right now, is that we've really had a shift in the way our agency operates in a more dramatic and impactful way.
And where would you need help in some areas that are in need of improvement?
I think you can always do more with more. And I think there's always a challenge, to be quite candid. I think there's always a challenge in just getting the information out there and circulating information. There's website, there's reports, and you always want to get the communication out there. And that's something that we do well at, but I think that's something that can always be built upon and improved.
As we all know, the summer of 2020 was a significant year for many of us, and especially after the murder of George Floyd. With regard to promoting accessibility for BIPOC youth in the BIPOC community, how has DCLA learned from and responded to the cultural movement and reckoning that has taken place in the wake of the reactions to the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others, as well as recent hate crimes against the AAPI community?
I think we actually have, we did a partnership with first, let me just say that as an agency, we really felt those losses in the summer of 2020 and the uprising, and we supported it. In terms of supporting it to youth, again, to the extent that we were able to support organizations that were providing programming and direct service to youth during that summer, it was a really challenging summer for our arts educators and for youth as well, because all of the connection was on a screen like we're having right now. It was really hard to be in person in some ways for that arts education, for that arts healing moment and opportunity. That said, where we could partner, we did with arts organizations that were still providing service on the ground. The other piece I would say in terms of the recent recent spate of hate crimes that we've seen, particularly around the AAPI community, that's devastating. And we have partnered with, and forgive me, I'm forgetting the artist's last name. It's Amanda, and then I'm trying to remember how to pronounce her last. What is it, Ryan? Cambodia. We worked with her. She's an artist. And you may have seen some of her her pictures. She was on the cover of Time magazine actually a couple of months ago. Some of her artwork that is. It's and I think I can send it to you afterwards too, but they're very impactful images of Asian women and men and says, I am not your enemy. It's like, I also have a right to be here. And that's how that's how she responded to that in AAPI. And it's that's one way that we're addressing that through our program with PAIR.
Right. And what community engagement tools does DCLA utilize to learn about the concerns of the cultural community?
We don't necessarily do community engagement in the way that maybe some other agencies do. We do surveys a lot, and we ask for people. We work with our groups that we fund, and we do surveys with them, and that's how we get some of the information from community engagement. But we don't necessarily have an outreach division that goes to different places around the city. If you're talking more about traditional outreach efforts.
And do you think DCLA would benefit from something like an outreach division?
I think we always are doing some form of outreach, but it's not, that's something to consider. I don't know that we've had that in the past, but it's something that we could consider.
And how can the city support with outreach?
Well, I think the city, the city has the community assistant unit out of City Hall, and they do a lot of engagement in all of the communities. And sometimes if an issue comes up through CAU, we get pulled in that relates to DCLA. We get pulled in and we work together to respond to that community or that constituent issue, whether that's from an organization or an individual or someone like yourself, an elected official. And that's where the city collaborates to find an answer to respond to that concern.
And has DCLA employed any mechanisms to initiate dialogue directly with BIPOC-led cultural institutions to provide a platform for these institutions to engage with the community?
Well, when you put it like that, no, we haven't done it quite like that. What we've done instead, again, is we work with our partner organizations and our funded organizations to help those conversations take place. But we have not been a convener for that kind of a roundtable discussion. But we take part when other convenings are being held. In particular with private philanthropy, sometimes we'll take help with that. If there's a research discussion taking place, we'll be a part of that.
And has any DCLA staff attended any of the various anti-racism trainings and workshops being offered by the Cultural at 3 or others? Actually working for the city, we have to do our own trainings every year. So we attend those trainings. We do sit on, thank you for mentioning the Culture at 3 calls. We do sit on those Culture at 3 calls. And I want to just do a shout out again to the folks that organized the Culture at 3 call. That really was born out of a crisis of 2020. And it really helped so many institutions and artists and individuals really map out how to live through COVID, how to get resources, how to work with other people, how to continue collaborations. That was a real, I think, great success. The 3 people that really pulled that together, Taryn, Sade, and Lucy Sexton, it was really wonderful that they pulled that together and continue to work on it. Absolutely. Culture at 3 is wonderful.
Yes.
In 2019, DCLA released the Create NYC 2019 Action Plan, a report detailing the progress made on the strategies and recommendations set forth in Create NYC. The 2019 Action Plan lists a number of ongoing efforts to improve DEI in the cultural workforce, including requiring members of the cultural institution groups, the SIGs, to submit DEI plans, including DEI questions on cultural development fund grant applications, DEI-related trainings, and the creation of programs that help New Yorkers of diverse backgrounds enter the cultural workforce. How has the agency maintained this goal under the constrained climate created by the COVID-19 crisis?
So for the DEI plans, let me just say that DCLA has met with each of the CIGs to talk through their DEIA plans, excuse me, and where we've made some suggestions. I think the real push is that it takes time. And we're talking about some institutions that have been around for over 100 years and other institutions that are still relatively, in the scheme of things, newer. But all the same, there's a shift taking place, right? I want to go back to the summer of 2020 and the uprising and the protests. I think that was really a signaling moment for many leaders around the country and also in the arts sector. And so I think a lot of the CIGs in particular were responding to that moment. And they have made some changes into their board structure and their senior leadership structure. And that's what we called for in that first round. We continue to, even though they provided a report, I don't want you to think that that was a report and then we just put it on the shelf.
Mhm.
We continue to have conversations with the CIGs, and we continue to work with our CDF process, as I outlined in the testimony as well, to build in more equity reforms in that process. And it may sound as if like, oh, well, why didn't you do this before? But, you know, sometimes you just get caught into a pattern, and we're making those changes now, particularly with a call for panelists of color to really be a part of that process to help select more groups to receive funding.
Thank
So
you.
those CDF reforms are well underway, as is the DEI plans.
And what, if any, kinds of resources has DCLA provided to support the SIGs or cultural institutions throughout New York City in reaching their diversity goals, whether it be anti-bias trainings or anything of that nature?
Well, you know, for the CIGs, we offer them support throughout the year, and then we don't necessarily tell a CIG, this is the training that you have to use. We have our own, as you know, with New York City, we have our own, through DCAS, we have our own training programs that we use for the city workforce. I would imagine some of the CIGs that have city workforce, they are able to access some of that. And then they have their own trainings that they offer.
Right. Well, what does DCLA plan to do in the short and long term to empower the BIPOC community to move towards a more equitable future and empower them to raise their voices?
I think we are going to continue to do what we do, which is to continue to have equity be the center lens from which we do our work. And really, again, we're bringing the CDF panel back, you know, we're bringing everybody back to panel. As I outlined in the testimony, we're providing multi-year funding is our hope, so that so that groups can rely on predictable funding. And we want to continue to partner with you to help get the word out so that these organizations can access funding opportunities.
Thank you. And I do have to just follow up with that before I turn over to some of my colleagues with questions. But as we all know, the mayor released his preliminary budget last week. How might the recent change in administration affect these plans to empower the BIPOC community through culture and arts?
Well, I think right now, yes, the mayor did release his budget last week. As I understand it, he's making a nod to efficiencies and streamlining and making the city together more productive. Right now, where we are in terms of our funding is pretty much on target for where we were this time last year. So right now, I don't see a barrier to us doing the work that we want to do.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I will now call on my colleagues for their questions for the administration. Please use the raise hand feature, and I could call on your name if any of you have any questions.
Chair, if I just might insert a point of order here that we, per your instructions, will be asking your colleagues to limit their council member questions to the administration, including answers for a period of 5 minutes, and the Sergeant at Arms will let them know when the timer is up. Thank you, Chair. Back to you.
Any questions for the admin? Council Member Joseph?
Oh, good. Good morning.
Good morning.
I know we're having a delayed. My question to you, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. My question is, now that we know that we were hit hard during COVID with our BIPOC community, how do we plan on engaging our students back into that space? What is the outreach? What level of engagement are you planning to do outreach for our students, especially the ones that are marginalized in the city in terms of having access to cultural institutions?
So we partner with the DOE and with the Arts and Educators Roundtable, and we actually had a conference call with both of them last week, not in advance of this hearing, but for something else. But it's timely that I had the conversation because we were talking, all three of us were talking about how impactful the arts are and how, especially for kids or for youth, excuse me. I guess I say kids because I still have a 9-year-old, but for youth, your confidence can be built so much. You know, maybe you're not going off to become whatever, a rocket scientist, but you do want to still have your confidence. And sometimes people really gravitate to the arts, and that's where they get that confidence when they're 5 years old or when they're 8 years old, because they say, wow, I'm really good at painting, or I really love coloring, and I really love the arts and what it means to me. And it's so impactful because it allows that confidence, allows for the foundation for future successes. And we talked about that. So what we do is we work with them, or we work with the DOE with their program to get out to the schools to have teaching artists that work in the public schools with students. Unfortunately, due to COVID, all of that went online, and it was really hard with remote. But now that people are back in school, kids are back in school, teaching artists are back in school, I think there's an opportunity again to really make that connection stronger. That unfortunately and sadly, it was lost a little bit in 2020, but I think it's coming back stronger, and we're continuing to partner with the DOE and the Arts and Education Roundtable to really make that happen. We don't work directly with schools. I just want to be clear about that. Like DCLA does not have an arm that goes to the schools. We have instead these partnerships with other agencies and other partners that do that work.
Thank you. And Councilmember Farias.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Really happy to be here. Thank you, Councilmember Osei. So for me, keeping money and economic growth within our communities is vital, super important. It's really how a lot of folks, particularly like in the Bronx, get to stay in our communities, raise our families here, and so on. I see here that we've received a 2019 SMU Data Arts NYC from DCLA Workforce Demographics did a pilot study and found that cultural institutions tend to be a bit unreflective of the communities they directly serve. And many of New York City's cultural institutions took steps to become more diverse within their leadership and in their programming, and we appreciate that. So for me, I'd really like to hear about how the BIPOC communities have been outreached and invited in inclusion, and then on the other hand, staff salaries are equitable amongst BIPOC members, and is there transparency in some of that? Do we have data around that? And then lastly, if there's any data on promotions to BIPOC, steps, if possible, around some of the data that we've received.
I'm sorry, you trailed in and out a little bit there, Councilmember Ferris. A couple of things. So one is, yes, we do partner with the CUNY Culture Corps to start when people are enrolled in CUNY to start accessing opportunities into the cultural workforce. We kind of see it as a step in the career ladder of joining the cultural workforce. It's paid internships, with multidiscipline arts organizations being a part of that program. So again, whether that's dance or museums, theater, music, so that's all included in that CUNY Culture Corps. In terms of your question about the workforce itself and salaries, I'm not privy to that. I don't have that data. I don't know, maybe we could try to we can talk more about maybe what it would take to gather a report that would get to that information, but I don't have that at my fingertips right now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just, And I think for a lot of us, we obviously want our institutions to look like our communities, and then we want to make sure that the members that are joining those institutions are actually able to be competitive and, you know, get promoted and move up so they stay. So then maybe the top tier of leadership looks a lot like our communities. But thank you for that.
I completely agree with you. And I think I agree with you is what I'll say.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Fidias. We'll now move on to Councilmember Brewer. Hi, good morning.
Thank you very much for your leadership on this topic. Two things. First of all, in response to, returning to the, figuring out how New York is going to come back. One of the ways I think is sort of the current WPA model. We're not WPA, but one of the suggestions would be we have these open streets that are not always programmed. So the question would be not to be siloed, but to find a way, because I know Cultural Affairs doesn't do the programming per se. You have to work with other groups, but trying to find ways that we do that with these open streets, it makes a huge difference. So that's number one. And the second is the vacant storefronts. In my area, we are doing some music in the open and the vacant storefronts, but it's like to have a program, again, paying people, sort of 2022 version of WPA, where there is a lot more activity that's public and obviously free and quality. So that I would love to see more discussion about that. I also want to just say along those lines, the mural program that you did summarizing was phenomenal. Every single school that did it was the best in terms of the quality, the artists, the students, so more murals also along that vein of open to the public. And then also picking up on Councilmember Joseph with the schools, one of the problems, again, this is a silo issue, is the school buses. Very expensive, hard to get. So sometimes the private schools have the buses and the public schools don't. So I'm just wondering, because that's the challenge. That is not your problem, but it is a problem for all of us. How do we get more students to go to some of the SIGs, in my opinion, because I know them well, and I think that's where a lot of the education takes place, but they can't get there. So that's something we got to figure that bus situation out. And then finally, Cool Culture can do some, but they can't do it all. And then I'm always hoping that the South Street Seaport Museum becomes a SIG. I'm just going to say it, even though everybody says, no, Gail, but I would like to see it become a SIG. So I don't know if you can answer any of those questions, and thank you for the time.
Sure. So I would just say, yes, Open Streets has been a very successful program. We do partner with our agency partners on that. We don't administer the program, but we help get the word out about the program. And I think we saw a lot of events, especially with the warmer weather. People were out and about, and even when it was a little cool, people still went out for Open Streets. I guess I'll just respond, Councilmember Brewer. The vacant storefront sounds like a great idea, especially since sadly there are so many vacant storefronts. It seems like a good opportunity to make something positive out of a negative situation. I think with the South Street Seaport, I will defer to others on that. I think making anything a SIG can be pretty challenging, but I appreciate hearing the request for it.
And what about the school buses?
School buses, we can continue to talk to DOE and see what we can do with that. We can talk to the Chancellor Banks and others.
Okay, we just need too little silo. We got to get rid of the silos, Commissioner, just FYI. That's what it is, it's a silo.
Yeah, agreed.
Councilmember Brewer, always with the heat. Thank you so much for the question, Councilmember Brewer.
You're lucky I didn't ask another 30 questions.
Do you have another one?
No, but I could go on all day, but I won't. I'll let somebody else.
We'll move on to Councilmember Hanif. Hi, good morning.
Hello, good morning, Chair Osei. Thank you. And hello, Commissioner Feinberg. So in my district, we've been very fortunate to bring and support immigrant serving arts and cultural organizations together to curate programming in our languages, using all open space possible. And I know there are groups here who will speak to the challenges. But what I find so critical is that this work is organized by our neighbors who've not historically had a say around programming offered by our city. So it's absolutely critical for me that we are constantly learning from and receiving feedback from what our most vulnerable neighbors need and centering them in this work. Could you share how best to support BIPOC immigrant-led cultural organizations and BIPOC artists? And then two, as a follow-up, could you speak about any challenges that impact your work in reaching BIPOC immigrant organizations and artists?
So I think in the past, so thank you for your question, Councilmember. So in the past, our Cultural Development Fund, where we give out money, it's a competitive process. And I will just be the first to say that I think streamlining the application process will be helpful all around, because we ask a lot of questions. We ask a lot of questions in that application for would-be recipients of our grant awards. And I think relieving some of that will help to streamline that process, will help right away with some of the smaller organizations that receive funding from DCLA. I think having panelists that are more representative of the city will also be helpful for smaller community-led, immigrant-led, arts-based organizations. I just think sometimes, representation matters, and it matters in every level and in every part of the city and in every engagement opportunity that we have. So I think those are two things that we do we're doing right off the bat that should help. I hope it helps. It'll be interesting to see what the process yields, but I'm hopeful that streamlining that process will be a way to reduce barriers and increase the funding that goes out to immigrant-led and BIPOC-led organizations that are smaller operating budgets. I think, and then also for supporting artists, in the past we had the City Artist Corps. We talked about that a little bit as well. That was $5,000 grants that went out to 72% of people identified as person of color. So that's another way that we're trying to help artists directly. Admittedly, that was money that we received from the federal government. That was part of our stimulus funding that we received. I think, down the road, like maybe there's a conversation to be had about how we can continue those type of efforts. But I think that's the challenge right now. I think finally, I'll just say that, working with our community-based partners, whether it's the local arts councils, whether it's the Arts and Education Roundtable, working with teaching artists, which is also can be more, maybe that needs to be bolstered as well. I think working with all of our artists, getting the word out as we continue to do that DEIA matters in the work that we do, and whether you're receiving funds through us, from us, whether it's through CDF or through the CIG or other means, those are the main two means. That's what we're looking for when we look at grant funding.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I have one more question,
Sure.
And I'll continue to follow up on your response. I'd like to know how we're making cultural programming accessible to our BIPOC neighbors with disabilities.
We do a lot of work. So I make a note to always say DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. We have worked in the past with the mayor's office with people with disabilities to work with them, particularly when it comes to ensuring that the communication that goes out is accessible for different audiences, that for people that have disabilities, whether it's a sight impairment, hearing impairment, or anything else. That's what we're doing to work with them. That's how we do that.
Time expired.
Deputy Commissioner, do you need more time to wrap up that question, or?
Sorry, there's a lot going on in our agency today. I think we're doing the 8,000 shoe giveaway today at our offices
right
at MFTA, which is where I am right now. So apologies if you're hearing some background noise here and there. No, I'm okay. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, save me a pair. Council Member Hudson, do you have any questions?
Okay, sorry, just getting unmuted. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair Osei and Commissioner. I just have a question that I think is in part a little bit of a follow-up to Councilmember Hanif's question. But with regards to independent BIPOC artists who have, talent and have come to New York to live out their wildest dreams, I'm wondering how DCLA helps those independent artists or supports them or does outreach to them, and specifically those who have no connections to government, no ties to existing nonprofits or other, forms of formal support. And, specifically also with like individual grants, all the different, resources you have available. How are we reaching those independent artists that may not otherwise be connected? Thank you.
Sure, thank you for the question, Council Member. So again, we post things online on our website. We haven't been able to send it out news, for a little while, but we will continue to resume sending out our bi-weekly communication that comes out from DCLA to the cultural. We have over, I think, 8,000 people subscribed to our listserv, where we detail funding opportunities that are both private and also public funding opportunities. I know I sound like a broken record when I say we partner with other agencies and we partner with other foundations and entities, but that really is how we do our work. That really is how we get the word out. We have our own communication, and then we also go on to, and I want to again do a shout out to the Culture at 3 call. That's another way that we get our information out about funding opportunities. I think they're going to be testifying later today as well. They could speak to that. We also, in terms of there's always a challenge of finding and reaching every single artist, but we try to get the word out through our website primarily and through our listserv.
Thank you, Councilmember Hudson. And Councilmember Lewis?
Thank you, Chair Osei. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. I just have a quick question. Recognizing the socioeconomic inequalities that exist in our city today that disproportionately affect BIPOC communities, I wanted to know, how is DCLA working with cultural institutions to ensure admission policies are inclusive of all families?
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis, for the question. I want to make sure I heard it correctly because I think I lost a word in there. So you're asking me to make sure, how are we working with cultural organizations to ensure that all families are admitted into institutions? Is that what you said?
To ensure that admission policies are all inclusive of all families. The reason I'm asking this question is I'm constantly getting emails from constituents who are beneficiaries of SNAP, EBT, and would like discounted or free admissions to cultural institutions, but they feel that they're getting blocked. So my question to you is, how's DCLA working with cultural institutions to ensure admission policies are inclusive of all families in New York City?
Okay, thank you for the question. I'm happy to look into this further. My understanding is that at many of the museums, there is a nominal fee. In other places, it may run too much of the gamut. So that's why I'd like to explore this a little bit more with you offline if possible. But we work with all of the partners that we work with are supposed to be admitting everybody. As I said earlier, we partner with IDNYC, and as part of that partnership, families are able to access many of these cultural institutions together. But I would like to have a conversation with you perhaps offline to talk a little bit more about this case, the reason that you're bringing this up from constituents raising this to you. And I want to hear more about that and see if we can explore that a little bit more.
Do any of my colleagues have any other questions? Right. Well, before we move on to further testimonies, I do want to end with saying that I'm very excited about this partnership between, our committee as well as this new council with DCLA. There is always a lot of work left to do, and I'm just appreciative that you were able to hop on this hearing with us and answer the questions in the way that you have. It seems to me that the best way that DCLA can flourish and support BIPOC communities is when there is a decent partnership with individuals in the city council or within, the administration. So I do want to thank you for answering these questions. And I want to thank my fabulous colleagues for hopping on this hearing and asking the questions that they did ask. I will now turn to our moderator to call on the members of the public to testify.
Thank you so much, Chair Osei. And this does conclude our, the conclusion of any questions for the administration. You are dismissed. Thank you so much for providing testimony. At this time, we'll be moving on to public testimony, and I'm going to make a few remarks about how that will unfold. All public testimony will be limited to 2 minutes. After I call your name, please wait a brief moment for the Sergeant at Arms to announce that you may begin speaking before your testimony. And note that panelists will be able to register to testify at this hearing up until 1 o'clock when the hearing will be concluded. Also, I would like to remind council members who have questions for a particular panelist to use the raise hand function in Zoom, and you'll be called on after the entire panel has completed its testimony in the order in which you have raised your hand. So without further ado, I'd like to please listen for your name. The first panel will consist of Adrian Benepi, Preeta Gupta, Dan Slippen, Sami Abu Shumez, Adoja Jones de Almeida, and Shanta Lawson. And please forgive me for any mispronunciations. Adrian Benepi, you may begin your testimony when the host unmutes you and the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Okay, thank you, Chair Osei and all committee members. My name is Adrian Benepi. I'm President and CEO of Brooklyn Botanic Garden. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. We are a proud member of the Cultural Institutions Group and a 112-year-old institution situated in Crown Heights. As part of meeting the needs of our community, intentional inclusion and access are at the forefront of our educational and public programming. Education at BBG is imagined as a ladder of learning whose rungs represent the suite of more than 24 educational programs that engage participants of all ages in hands-on experiences that meaningfully connect them to the world of plants and environmental sustainability. One such program is Project Greenreach, which serves K to 8th grade teachers in their classes from Title I schools in Brooklyn, reaching approximately 40 schools, 2,000 students, and more than 80 teachers every year. Teachers of varied backgrounds and grades are provided with professional development and hands-on inquiry-based exploration of plants. They're given tools to bring plants into the schools, and our pedagogy lives on through trained teachers who year after year repeat the lessons they've learned through the program in their classrooms. The next rung on this ladder is the Garden Apprentice Program, or GAP. GAP is a youth development program for students in grades 8 to 12. The apprentices make a 9-month commitment to GAP from March to November, which includes spring training, summer programming, and a weekly commitment through the spring and fall, and participants receive a stipend for their hard work. The oldest tier participants are paid minimum wage for the time they commit to the program. Garden apprentices of all tiers work with children behind the scenes with staff or in community-facing projects. They learn about botany, environmentalism, and protecting the earth. They grow, harvest, and cook fruits, vegetables, and herbs in the children's garden. They explore the garden's amazing plant collections, greenhouses, and they develop job skills, including teamwork, communication, and responsibility. Inclusion and access are built into our recruitment efforts for GAP and all of our programs. As a result, historically, more than 70% of the garden apprentices come from BIPOC communities, and 41% speak a language besides English at home, with 10 different languages being spoken by current participants. The Brooklyn Academy of Science and the Environment base across Washington Avenue is a small New York City public high school that primarily serves Crown Heights and integrates the mission and resources of BBG to support academic excellence and rigor for students in our community. BASE has a yearly average of 400 students in grades 9 through 12. Staff at BASE and BBG support families to help students develop as critical thinkers, active learners, problem solvers, and scientifically literate, engaged citizens who value and respect the environment. Our staff are responsible for teaching science classes, mentoring students, helping find internship opportunities, and providing after-school programming for students. I should say I spoke at commencement last spring. Staff also play a key role in school governance, including participate in the school leadership team. In addition to our educational offerings, the Garden's Greening Office places a strong emphasis in providing resources to historically underserved communities and has worked to amplify this work in these communities. That includes programs like Greenest Block in Brooklyn Contest, the Community Garden Alliance, and Brooklyn Urban Gardeners, a youth train the trainer program, which has fostered community building and grassroots community greening efforts across green deserts and underserved communities in Brooklyn. Finally, our public programs team is dedicated to providing inclusive programming and collaborates with community-based artists and arts organizations across Brooklyn, including the Haitian Cultural Center, to ensure all our diverse communities feel welcome in the Garden and are served by programming. Finally, and this is an answer to Councilmember Lewis's question, the Garden is committed to eliminating all barriers to access, and we will continue making 20% of all tickets available that day free for community members, and children are always admitted free at all times. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and my compliment you, Chair Osei, on a beautiful tie. I can't tell if it's flowers or jet planes on it on the screen, but it's a great tie.
I think it's a weed or like a flower.
Yeah, that's great. It's hard to find a good floral tie, believe me, I'm trying.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Our next member to testify the public is Preti Gupta, and excuse me if I've mispronounced your name. You may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Dan, are you unable to unmute? Dan is sharing the time with me.
Oh, okay. That would be Dan Slippin as
Yep.
well. Dan, you may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Dan Slippin, and I am the Vice President of Government and Corporate Relations at the American Museum of Natural History. I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Preti Gupta, who is the museum's Senior Director for Children and Youth Programming. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to inform the committee on the work of the museum and what we are doing to expand access for the underserved BIPOC youth and the BIPOC community at large in New York. So some people think of the museum as a great tourist attraction to see really cool dead stuff. But the reality is we are a major scientific research facility and a major educational provider to New Yorkers, our schools, our teachers, our children, and their families. But yes, the dinosaurs are pretty cool. The museum's programming serves children as young as 2.5 years old, all the way through graduate school. All of our programming is available either through scholarship or on a sliding pay scale to ensure programming is available to all. In fact, of the nearly 2,000 New York City school children who participate in our out-of-school time programming, 50% of them either attend for free or on a sliding pay scale. And the students participating are reflective of the city's public school population. The museum has a robust teacher professional development program, and thanks to the support from the City Council and the Department of Education, the museum administers the largest formalized science education program in the country called Urban Advantage, of which many of our partners are on this call, including former Commissioner Adrian Banapy and the New York Botanical Garden. Brooklyn Botanical Garden, but NYBG too. This program serves the entire city and includes schools in your district, Mr. Chairman, the School of Integrated Learning, the Stephen Decatur School, the Mediba Prep, Unity Prep, Bedford-Stuy New Beginning Charter School, and the Brooklyn Green School. I would now like to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Preti Gupta, who can take you through some examples of the museum's programming. Thank you.
In the short time, I'll just talk about the fact that we work with middle and high schoolers, particularly around creating sense of belonging, both in the museum and with STEM. So once they're in high school, they can work as floor facilitators and get paid talking to families, for thousands of families, sharing and talking and having conversations around STEM. Other youth get paid to work alongside scientists and doing authentic science research and often publishing or co-publishing their work. And in your council district, Mr. Chairman, we have close partnerships with schools and CBOs, and we develop relationships so that we can do the recruitment work that is so critical. We work with NYCHA communities to connect with families. And we also work with the boys. Most recently, we just worked with the Boys and Girls High School, as well as the Uncommon Charter School, where students participated in an 8-hour workshop learning about the science of viruses and vaccines. We thank you for the opportunity to inform us to inform you on the work we're doing in support of the BIPOC community, and stand ready to assist the committee, the council, and the city in continuing this very important work.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Sami Abu Shumez. You may begin testifying when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Chair Osei, for the opportunity to testify. Ya ning ning ya ning ning ya ning ning ya ning ya ning ning ya ning ning ya ning ya ning. As a musician who practices traditional Arabic music, I'm very fortunate to serve as Deputy Director at Flushing Town Hall. Our mission is to present global art forms representing the cultural diversity surrounding us in Queens. Our primary audience is BIPOC communities and youth. Pre-pandemic, we served 72,000 annually, including 23,000 school students, most from Title I schools, and a majority from homes speaking English as a second language. Our success in serving BIPOC communities results from a combination of several factors. First, our location in the most diverse county in the nation. Second, a mission that since our founding in 1979 has been focused on the cultures of these communities, including recent immigrants, the heritage of jazz artists based in Queens, and work with Indigenous peoples from Queens and Long Island. And third, extensive partnerships. We're a mid-sized organization with a $2.6 million budget and 16 full-time staff. Since Queens is home to at least 168 languages, we can't realize the global scope of our mission without partnerships with both smaller organizations, like the Kunchu Chinese Opera Society or Kalpuli Mexican Dance Company, and larger organizations like Carnegie Hall or Queens College. We depend on the whole arts ecosystem to do our work, but it is fragile. The city underfunds the arts, and BIPOC organizations in particular need more resources. I am proud to live in a city that funds one of the most important museums of the world to the tune of $25 million annually. Yet when that figure is more than the total cultural funding for Queens and Staten Island combined, it's an indication that radical game-changing funding increases are needed in many neighborhoods of New York. We should never defund larger organizations to have enough for smaller ones, but we need to make the overall pot much bigger and be more strategic about increases. In 2016, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams wrote an essay calling on the city to rectify arts funding inequities. Now let's hope he takes action as mayor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Our next panelist is Adoja Jones de Almeida. Again, excuse if I mangled the pronunciation of your lovely name. Thank you. You may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I want to start by thanking Chair Osei and members of the City Council for this opportunity. I'm Adjoa Jones de Almeida, Deputy Director for Learning and Social Impact at the Brooklyn Museum. And I'm here to testify on the impact of COVID-19 on local audiences and to speak on the launch of the museum's social action framework centering BIPOC communities. The Brooklyn Museum is a proud member of the CIGs, a collective of 34 nonprofit museums performing arts centers, historical societies, zoos, and botanical gardens across all 5 boroughs with a commitment to serving all New Yorkers. The museum is committed to strengthening public life by using art as a catalyst for dialogue and community resilience through programs that center the needs and interests of diverse Brooklyn communities. Immediately after closing our doors in March 2020, we reached out to key constituencies through dozens of interviews and surveys to assess the impact of the pandemic on their lives and to assess how we might best support them. Some of the key initiatives that we developed in response to what we heard included partnering with our Campaign Against Hunger, community-based organization in Brooklyn, to provide food and arts materials on a weekly basis to local families, developing an Art and Empathy free virtual series targeting populations most impacted by the pandemic and inviting them to share strategies for coping with trauma and anxiety through art making and community dialogue, distributing 2,500 art backpacks filled with quality art materials and art projects to help kids and families feeling isolated and overwhelmed, implementing our first ever online summer camp and expanding our free online offerings for families and teens, offering free support for teachers, including free virtual visits for public schools, and maintaining our commitments to teaching artists by honoring their contracts and supporting them in the transition to virtual art making programs. As New York City begins to see the light at the end of this pandemic's long tunnel, the Brooklyn Museum is committed to playing an active role in New York's recovery, supporting our local communities by developing exhibits, public programs, education, and economic opportunities in service of our local communities and in alignment with our broader efforts for social change. While many organizations launched DEIA efforts as a result of the pandemic and the racial reckonings following the murder of George Floyd, we've been deeply engaged in internal DEIA work since 2017 and currently have 9 staff action committees encompassing over 40 staff members across 16 departments, all actively involved in co-leading dozens of DEIA initiatives. Building on this critical groundwork, we've developed a social action framework that proposes to align our internal work for greater equity within the museum with more intentional approaches to social action for Brooklyn communities, focused on 2 key social justice themes that we're committing to centering in our exhibitions, programs, and institutional practices over the next 5 years. And those are mass criminalization and climate change. In addition, the framework strives to expand our work with local communities by inviting thought partnership with local leaders and by directing our resources to underinvested Brooklyn communities. As part of this framework, our main goals over the next 5 years include intentionally partnering with local BIPOC businesses as vendors for our programs in our shop and in our outdoor vendors market, expanding our work with adult English language learners, BIPOC elders, and under-resourced K-12 schools, and with families in public housing and in the foster care system, creating spaces through exhibitions, education, and public programs that encourage participants to communicate across difference in terms of identity, ability, and points of view, consistently including exhibitions and programs in our calendars that provide opportunities for audiences to meaningfully engage around the themes of mass criminalization and climate change, aligning our internal practices to these efforts by, for example, developing museum-wide procurement policies and hiring practices that support our work against mass criminalization and climate change, and developing a community thought partners advisory committee, providing an internal structure for ongoing dialogue and feedback from community leaders. We know that the road ahead will be long and steep, and we look forward to your support and partnership. Onward and upwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And our final panelist on this panel will be Shanta Lawson. You may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you. And good morning, Chair Osei and members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Shanta Lawson. I currently serve as the Director of Education at the Studio Museum in Harlem, an organization that for over 50 years has been the nexus for artists of African descent, locally, nationally, and internationally, and whose history is intertwined with ongoing efforts to increase access to the arts for the BIPOC community. The Studio Museum is also a proud member of the Cultural Institutions Group, and is deeply grateful to partner with and receive support from the city. At the time of its founding in 1968, the Studio Museum's education and public programs sought to enable people in Harlem to visit a museum without having to leave their neighborhood. This aim has grown in scope over the last 50 years and to deepen the roots in the community by engaging youth, adults, and seniors alike. From school partnerships to conversations with artists, we strive to create experimental spaces, inquiry-driven programs, and accessible resources for Harlem. Today, I want to draw your attention to a cornerstone of our education programming called Expanding the Walls. Established in 2001, this program supports teenagers as they explore and define their artistic practices while building community through workshops, gallery visits, and discussions. Having worked at the Studio Museum for almost 20 years, I've been lucky enough to see nearly every cohort of Expanding the Walls in action. And each year I'm struck by the meaningful relationships that photography allows these young people to build with their city, with each other, and themselves. As one recent participant, Khadijah, put it, Expanding the Walls has helped me to express my full self and has given me the strength to allow others to see that in me as well. We remain committed to facilitating this type of engagement with art and holding space for our Harlem community that is compassionate, supportive, and safe for program participants and our partners. Throughout our history, the Studio Museum has never faltered in its commitment to fostering lifelong learning and provide programs at no cost at all times to all. Collaborations within our Uptown community have created meaningful interactions with works of art within our neighborhood synonymous with creativity, history, and Black culture. The need to increase these points of access is more urgent than ever and is exactly the kind of work that will help us respond to the effects of the pandemic and the fundamental shift in this nation's dialogue about diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. The CIGs and cultural community as a whole are reimagining the ways that we engage with communities physically and online to extend our resources and programs to a wider audience at a critical time of change. Thank you so much again for your support of the cultural community and the opportunity to testify at this hearing.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all of our panelists who testified in this first panel for their testimony. I would also like to take a moment to remind council members who have questions for anyone on this panelist to please use the Zoom raise hand function. You'll be called on in order of which you raise your hand. I'll give you a moment to make sure that we haven't left anyone out while we're waiting for that to happen. I will give you a heads up as to our second panel will consist of Bennett Perez, Angel Hernandez, and James C. Horton. Seeing no questions, hands raised for this panel, I want to thank you all very much, and we'll move on to Bennett Perez in panel 2. You may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Time starts now.
I want to thank Chairman Osei and the members of the committee for the opportunity to testify in expanding access to cultural institutions for BIPOC youth. My name is Bennett Perez, and I am a Youth Development Associate for the Wildlife Conservation Society. I want to briefly talk about my experience from intern to employee through the WCS STEM Career Lattice Program, an innovative tiered engagement model that provides WCS youth ages 14 to 24 with paid leadership opportunities that scaffold their professional experience and prepare them to transition into paid positions in WCS in our industry. When I was a junior at John Bond High School in Queens, I learned about an exciting new program offered by the Wildlife Conservation Society and the STEM Career Lattice. Ever since I was a little kid, I had always wanted to shadow a zookeeper, especially at the Queens Zoo, the zoo I had visited my whole life since I grew up right in the neighborhood. One of my most cherished teenage memories was my internship in the animal department at the end of the program. I was given a WCS uniform, which I'd always dreamed of having. 10 years later, I still have it. I was allowed to see behind the scenes and get hands-on experience. Collectively, youth earn an average of $5 million working in the 5 WCS parks on an annual basis. This program combines education, workforce development, networking, and outreach to increase opportunities for over 1,400 youth. Throughout the lattice, WCS continues to provide a growing group of diverse young New Yorkers with the experience to build meaningful careers at our 5 parks and the skills to begin lifelong careers in STEM. I distinctly remember that at the time, not many of my peers had had internships yet. I remember feeling deeply honored to already have an internship to add to my resume. I learned valuable skills and received college and career readiness training. This really boosted my confidence. Coming full circle, I now work for WCS in the pivotal role of Youth Development Associate, helping to make job, internship, and volunteer opportunities more equitable and obtainable for New York City youth that were just like me. In addition to my work within WCS, my role also gives me the chance to participate in the Sci Network New York City, a consortium led by WCS and a total of 12 science-based cultural institutions in the city. The Sci Network seeks to develop systems to connect interns with employment opportunities across institutions. Collectively, these institutions host more than 1,200 interns each year and focus on recruiting youth from underrepresented communities in the STEM field. It never ceases to bring a smile to my face that I'm helping young adults who, like me, are also curious, eager to learn, and yearning for the chance to explore all that is out there. I again want to thank the Council for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Wildlife Conservation Society and the STEM community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we will hear from Angel Hernandez. You can begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Good morning, Chair Osei and members of the committee. Thank you for letting us testify today. I also want to thank Speaker Adams and the rest of the City Council for their ongoing support of cultural and scientific organizations like ours. NYBG, New York Botanical Garden, is a proud member of the Cultural Institutions Group, CIG, a coalition of 34 nonprofit organizations located across the 5 boroughs with a commitment to serve all New Yorkers by advancing inclusion, diversity, access, and equity individually and collectively. The Garden is a cultural anchor in the Bronx and serves some of the most diverse communities in the city. Our workforce consists of 600 staffers, 51% identify as people of color, over half are Bronx residents, and 175 are DC 37 union employees. During the first COVID-19 outbreak in 2020, we launched the Bronx Neighbors Initiative so that residents can visit us at no cost on any day of the week. Since then, over 100,000 Bronx residents of BIPOC communities visited our grounds and still counting. To address food insecurity in the Bronx, we launched the Bronx Community Farm Hoods Initiative so that seedling plants and fresh produce grown and harvested from our Edu Academy can reach neighborhood food pantries, community gardens, and mutual aids. NYBG and our CIG colleagues serve as spaces of knowledge and cultivation for our community's talent, while offering career paths in the sciences for our urban youth. For our next exhibition, Around the Table, Stories of the Foods We Love, we created a call to Bronx artists so that their work inspired by foods from around the world can be incorporated and displayed. We also work closely with our Bronx high schools so that students can partake in science paid internships like the High School Explainers Program. Being an explainer at NYBG means you collaborate with experienced professionals and learn various skills in teaching, public speaking, field and plant research, assisting staff with school groups, and much more. Most of our explainers live in the Bronx, attend Bronx high schools, and identify as persons of color. Please let me introduce you to Venice Pinnock, who will briefly share with us her journey from Master Explainer to Edible Academy Garden Educator.
The Explainer program literally changed my life, both personally and professionally. I grew up in the Bronx, and before I was accepted to the program at age 14, I was barely passing my science classes. When I first walked through the gates of the garden, I was amazed at the diversity of life and nature around me. I found myself surrounded by passionate mentors who showed me that science isn't all lab coats and test tubes, but that it can be outdoors and it's fueled by curiosity. During my time at the Explainer program, I developed my interpersonal skills and I learned and practiced important professional skills as well. Ultimately, the program set me on a path to a career in the sciences. It gave me the confidence that I could become an environmental science educator. And today, through my work as a garden educator at the Edible Academy, I'm spreading the same excitement for science and nature with the next generation of youth in my neighborhood.
Thank you for letting us testify this morning. In the weeks to come, you will be holding budget hearings, and we'll be back to speak to you about important council initiatives that make all of this possible, like the New York Sci Network, urban advantage, and core operating funding to DCLA being just a few. We hope that you have an idea of how important expanding access to culture for BIPOC communities create future professionals and thus improves the quality of our city and the world beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We have one more panelist to testify on the second panel, James C. Horton. I see the chair has his hand raised. I know that he will want to ask some questions of everyone who has participated so far. Chair, do you want to speak now or would you?
Sure, yeah. If any of the, thank you, Ms. Dwyer, and
Sure.
thank you for the panelists that have testified thus far. I do have a question for some of the SIGs that are on the call. I know that the Natural History Museum was here, the Brooklyn Museum, as well as the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. If any of you are on this call, I just wanted to ask how the SIGs are working to help smaller organizations, especially around issues of equity, equality, and inclusion through a BIPOC lens.
Please feel free to raise your hand. Use the Zoom raise hand function. Thank you.
Mr. Benepi?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Chair Osei. We work with lots of small organizations. They tend to be primarily environmental organizations such as the Red Hook Initiative and Red Hook. So we are partnering with the Red Hook Initiative on a major composting operation there. Also, through our outreach efforts, we work with scores, perhaps as many as several hundred community gardens around Brooklyn. Brooklyn has more community gardens than any borough in the city. And we work with smaller arts organizations on art projects and things like that. But our primary relationships are through our outreach and greening and sort of environmental things, as I mentioned, such as with Red Hook Initiative, which is a very big youth empowerment program.
Thank you for your response. Ms. Yones del Almeida.
Hello. Well, first I want to say thank you for that question. I think it's a really important question. And, you know, speaking for myself, I think it's really important that more support be directed towards smaller BIPOC-led organizations. I think that in terms of the Brooklyn Museums, a lot of the work that we're centering in this moment around partnerships, critical partnerships, the attempt is to bring more voice and visibility to our partners. So for example, we've been longtime collaborators with Culture, and I don't know if they're here represented, but they, you know, do amazing work and are experts at the work that they do in extending opportunities for BIPOC families. So we've had a long-standing kind of partnership with them, and you know, have heard feedback from them, both positive and critical, around the ways that we need to improve and expand our work. I see several folks on this call who are in who I know that I've partnered with and have looked to their thought partnership over the years. We also, as part of our social action framework, are now really looking to develop strategic partnerships around the themes of mass criminalization and climate change, and looking to those who have been at the forefront of that work to bring more visibility and resources, whether that be through procurement and vending, but also space and visibility to those orgs. So for example, we're entering a second-year partnership with Center for Court Innovation by developing Project Reset, which is an art-based diversion program for individuals receiving desk appearance tickets. And we are really excited to continue that partnership, and are also just in the beginning phases of partnering with, of kind of brainstorming possibilities with the New York Aquarium, in relationship to some of the exhibitions that we have coming up centering issues of environmental justice. In addition, our work with teaching artists is one where we really try to center the needs of Brooklyn-based artists and are intentional in hiring part-time artists to help us expand the impact of our work.
Thank you. And I will defer back to the moderator for more testimonies from more panelists.
Thank you so much, Chair. Happy to call our final panelist, James C. Horton, for this particular panel. Mr. Horton, you may begin testifying when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Time starts now.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair Osi and members of the committee. And thank you for providing the opportunity to share testimony this morning. My name is James C. Horton, and I'm here today as Vice President of Education and Engagement at the Museum of the City of New York. I'm going to share out our efforts. I'm here to listen, learn, and create meaningful opportunities for engagement by, for, and with BIPOC communities through our programming and practices. Located at the top of Museum Mile, the Museum of the City of New York engages hundreds of thousands of visitors and online viewers each year through exhibitions, education, and public programs, collections, access, and more to celebrate, document, and interpret the city's past, present, and future. The museum is a proud member of the Cultural Institutions Group, and as my fellow CIGs have stated, inclusion, diversity, equity, access, and justice are central to our mission as cultural organizations and have remained a keen focus for the CIGs for many years. This is especially true at the museum, where we'll be celebrating our historical milestone of 100 years as a New York City storyteller in 2023. To better connect with our audiences from across the city, we look ahead to our next century. We've already introduced and continue to develop programming that is responsive to the needs of our communities where New Yorkers live, work, learn, and play. This includes through our exhibitions such as Activist New York, where stories of civil rights, labor movements, sexual identity, religious freedom are explored, and New York at its core exhibition, which speaks specifically to New York City's indigenous roots and the long history of immigration. Our education programs, including on-site virtual field trips, highlighting the stories of lesser-known New Yorkers, will serve 50,000 K-12 students each year, and educator courses that work with teachers to explore the people of New York, histories, and legacy of the Lenape. Our on-site and virtual audiences of all ages have the opportunities to engage with series such as Soul of the City that highlight New York City's musical talents, our MC&Y Poets Cafe, and also engage with our Black History Month programming, Juneteenth programming, and as the Deputy Commissioner said, working with AAPI communities, specifically Amanda Pingbody Pakia, who will be launching a new exhibit here at the museum, which will open on March 18th. As we reflect on the last 100 years, we are starting to think more about how we engage with the city over the next 100 years and truly position ourselves to be of service of the community. We're kicking off an initiative called the Reach 100 Ambassadors that will engage in an intergenerational learning of working with 50 New Yorkers who are adults and 50 young people throughout New York City through a competitive application process. The focus of the youth cohort will be dedicated to supporting and maximizing their full potential as cultural ambassadors and change agents in our great city. Youth will be introduced to several different learning imperatives with a primary focus on creative youth development, college and career readiness, entrepreneurship, and civic engagement, all with a unique emphasis on youth-driven programming. I want to thank the members of the committee for receiving this testimony today and for the work and service that you're doing in expanding opportunities for BIPOC communities in New York City. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Mr. Horton. Before we move to the next panel, I'd like to remind any council members to use their Zoom raise hand function if they have any questions for this particular panel. Seeing none, we'll move ahead and I'll announce the members of panel 3. We'll be hearing from Richard Hinojosa, Sade Lithcott, and Lucy Sexton. Mr. Hinojosa, you may begin as soon as the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chair Ose and members of the committee. I'm Richard Hinojosa. As said, I'm Director of Education for the Queen's Theater. We're grateful for the Council's vital support of culture in New York City, and we appreciate this opportunity to share some of the ways that Queen's Theater works to support BIPOC community members, especially children. Queen's Theater is located in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park. In our borough, more than 205 languages are spoken daily. All of our programming is designed to reflect and celebrate our uniquely diverse community. And today I will highlight just 3 of our current education programs that illustrate that commitment. In 2016, we realized we needed to be more intentional and proactive to equitably represent and serve the 20% of our community members who are deaf and disabled when we launched the Theater for All initiative, a multifaceted program designed to advance the inclusion of disabled people in the performing arts as artists, cultural workers, audience members, and students. We expanded our accessibility services, hired a director of inclusion, launched a professional training program, and developed multiple in-school programs. We have partnered with the Lexington School for the Deaf, where 92% of the students are BIPOC youth, and hiring disabled teaching artists. We run playmaking programs in District 75 schools. The majority of the participants in those programs have been children of color. Queen's Theater is also proud to partner with Camille A. Brown and Dancers to host Everybody Moves Black Girl Spectrum program, which welcomes Black, Brown, and girls of color for weekly dance workshops free of cost to their families. The program celebrates the rich legacy and history of African American and African diaspora movement-based traditions found in social dance. The workshops support self-expression, promote health and well-being, embody positivity, and it nurtures the pride in the deep history of New York City's girls and teens of color. Queen's Theater's English Language Learners program is designed to support elementary and middle school students who are learning English as a new language. The program helps with language acquisition and builds the students' confidence by engaging them in creating an original play with original songs. Our teaching artists use improvisation, singing, and acting activities and writing activities to guide them through the process. And we have run this program in over 12 schools for over 8 years. Queen's Theater's ability to develop and deliver inclusive and meaningful programming starts with our organization. We have a board-approved access, equity, diversity, and inclusion plan, and staff members are trained in disability inclusion, and they have also taken anti-racism training with the People's Institute of Survival and beyond. Queen's Theater is a proud member of the Cultural Institutions Group, a diverse coalition of 34 organizations who share public-private partnership with the City of New York and are located in all 5 boroughs of the city, including 8 right here in Queens. We are proud to be a part of the larger cultural community. The health and strength of the entire ecosystem is critically important, and we are grateful for your friendship and leadership, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Sade Lithcott. Sade, you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon. Oh, we're not even at afternoon yet. Y'all, we're doing this. Good morning, Chair Osei and esteemed council members and colleagues. My name is Sade Lithcott. I'm the CEO of the National Black Theater in Harlem, and I'm the chair of the Coalition of Theaters of Color, a coalition that represents the largest body of culturally specific theaters in all 5 boroughs. As well, I am the co-leader of Culture at 3, along with Lucy Sexton and Terrence Sacramone. Thank you all so much for the kind remarks earlier in the call around Culture at 3. We appreciate it so much. So today I've prepared remarks to tell you about the consummately great work and service that CTC organizations deliver across all 5 boroughs. I was going to speak about all of the free public programs that the National Black Theater in particular has delivered in parks, plazas, and pavilions, centering healing and resilience to communities across New York City, those ravaged most by COVID and gun violence. But I just can't bring myself to give that testimony today. Instead, I testify today admittedly from a space of fatigue. In preparing my remarks today, I had revisited a handful of testimonies I've given over the last 2 years, testimonies and hearings that ask us over and over again to do the labor of explaining and justifying why or how our lives should matter as BIPOC organizations delivering program consistently to our communities. This is starting respectfully to feel performative, as suggested peg cuts to DCLA's CDF funding are being presented that would devastate and disproportionately affect BIPOC organizations, which data has proven are more reliant on government funding. You see, there are systems of power that grant privilege and access unequally, such that inequities and injustice result and continue to be perpetuated. There should be no more hearings on but about the how much we need to sustain and grow the work that BIPOC organizations do. We are not asking for charity. We are asking for you, the council, stewards of the people's will, to simply listen to the people. In the finding and implementation of the 2017 and 2019 Create NYC plan, and in the goals of the One New York plan they outline clearly, quote, the public's desire for more investment of resources to historically underserved communities, creation of equitable distribution of funding to arts, culture, and science, and to create new supports for arts and cultural organizations with primary missions serving historically and underrepresented communities. Just last week, QArts NYC brown paper was released that found POC art entities are often connected to a sense of place and neighborhood, which we need now more than ever, but rarely have a truly stable space of their own. We must do better. In 2020, as our world begins to connect again, I want to make sure that we do not look away from the irrevocable truths of the city funding structures are not equitable. We are asking for transparent public funding that is allocated with an eye towards correcting historic inequities. We must continue to invest and grow cultural initiatives like the CTC initiative and others, which are the only vehicles in the cultural budget that are accountable to equity in any measurable way. And for the first time in the history of the city, BIPOC organizations deserve dedicated and secure baseline funding. The CTC is asking that you create a vehicle for change New Yorkers continue to ask for with the establishment of a $15 million cultural equity fund as represented in the cultural sector's CPR plan that we testified about last year. Yes, the people have the power, but you, our elected friends in government, must lean into your sacred oath to exercise your will. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe the chair had some questions for Ms. Lithcott. Otherwise, we can move on to.
Sure. Is Lucy testifying as well?
Yes, Lucy is going to be offering testimony next. Perhaps we can
I'll
go
ask my
ahead.
questions after Lucy's testimony, if that's
Thank
okay.
you, Chair. Thanks for clarifying that. Next, we'll be hearing from Lucy Sexton. Lucy, you may begin your testimony as soon as the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chair Osei and members of the City Council for this important and urgent hearing. My name is Lucy Sexton, and I am with the citywide Cultural Advocacy Coalition, New Yorkers for Culture and Arts. When we talk about increasing access to culture for Black, Latinx, Asian, and Indigenous communities in New York City, we must talk about money. It is the historic and intentional underfunding of Black and Brown communities that makes our cultural field inequitable. The redlining maps are the COVID impact maps, are the maps of neighborhoods with little to no access to cultural assets, meaning neighborhoods targeted by redlining for decades and suffering most from COVID also lack everything from community centers to dance studios to performance spaces for local artists and musicians. I think we need to talk about reimagining New York City, one with arts and culture supported in all communities, one that invests in the economic and emotional recovery of every neighborhood. It is time to be bold with our budget and intentional in laying the groundwork for an equitable, just, diverse, and thriving city. The benefits that arts and culture bring extend far beyond economics. As I so often reference, data shows that neighborhoods with cultural assets have improved outcomes in education, aging, mental health, youth involvement with criminal justice, community strength, and public safety. And the neighborhoods in need lack adequate cultural assets and are losing the ones they had. Arts East New York, one of the few cultural organizations in Eastern Brooklyn, closed at the beginning of the pandemic and nothing has replaced it. We must direct investments to these neighborhoods now if we are to increase access to the myriad benefits of culture to BIPOC New Yorkers. As we emerge from this crisis, a crisis that has devastated the cultural sector across the board, we must not simply refill the buckets of funding that existed before. We must find new ways for funding to flow. Right now, arts and culture are hanging on by a thread, federal relief is running out, and Omicron has dealt another costly setback to a sector trying to reopen. And BIPOC-led and serving organizations who the DCLA's own study showed received the least relief are most at risk. I am asking that we intentionally invest in the parts of our ecosystem most likely to disappear. In last year's budget campaign, New Yorkers for Culture and Arts was proud to support an ask that Sade just referred to called the Cultural Plan for Recovery. It called for a cultural equity fund to address funding inequities and a zip code fund, which would provide relief for neighborhoods hardest hit by COVID and most in need of the healing, public safety, and community strengthening that culture can provide. We cannot come out of this terrible time with a cultural landscape that is more white, more homogenous, and more centralized than it was before. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify.
Thank you so much. And now I'll turn it over to Chair Osei, who I believe has questions for both Lucy and Sade.
Thank you, Ms. Dwyer, and thank you, Ms. Sexton and Ms. Lythcott for your testimonies. When you get a chance, if you haven't already, if you could send us over, or my office over, the plan that you have for the Cultural Equity Fund, I would definitely love to take a look at that. And just hearing the heart and your testimony, rings true for me as an individual, and now being in the council, I want to be the best partner in terms of uplifting and supporting our BIPOC culturals. So I really do appreciate you for testifying. And I do have a couple questions just to clarify how the city and the council can be the best partner that they could possibly be, especially when it comes to working with DCLA. And I wanted to ask you both, and either of you can chime in and answer any of these questions. But what do you see as the biggest barriers to providing access to arts and culture for underserved BIPOC youth and the BIPOC community at large? I know DCLA said that the education was one of the largest barriers that were in their way, but I would love to hear from both of you, especially with how involved you are in this subject.
Lucy, do you want to go? I would say one of the biggest, so this is not a siloed issue from my vantage point, that accessibility to programs are an interconnected issue around, diminished capacity and access to resources within BIPOC organizations, which is why this kind of cultural equity fund really earmarks helping BIPOC organizations in general who are more dependent on government funding to bolster some of their capacity and marketing and outreach issues. The truth of the matter is, I run a small Black organization. I'm the CEO and I'm testifying and spent like 2 hours today because I don't have anyone else on my staff to do it. Those are the same barriers of access because so many of our organizations, we have to wear all of the different hats. And so when you don't have like multi-million-dollar marketing or outreach, you do the best you can, you bootstrap it. So I would say one thing is like recognizing the barrier to entry a lot of times is really on the organization needing the support for capacity and access to resources. And then the other thing is, I think that folks should study this brown paper that came out from Hugh Arts NYC that really maps over 400 BIPOC organizations across the 5 boroughs, because what it dispels is the notion that there are actual cultural deserts. They're not cultural deserts. There are neighborhoods and cultural communities that are underfunded. And so the vibrancy that's happening that is not even recognized is part and parcel to our ability to get the word out around the work, the good work that folks do. So that's how I would answer that.
And I'll only add to that the founding organization that existed before New Yorkers for Culture and Arts was called 1% for Culture. And when you're talking about amplifying the work that everybody has been talking about, and then in addition, investing properly in the underfunded BIPOC-led and BIPOC-serving cultural organizations, in addition, expanding into those cultural deserts and those neighborhoods that need robust cultural assets, you are talking about something that is about 4 times the budget that we currently get, right? We are currently funded at 0.25% of the city budget. And when you see the impact that we can have in neighborhoods, whether it's in mental health, whether it's in community safety, whether it's in education, aging, it really does call for a reconfiguring of where we are spending our money in the city. So that's why I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question, how can the city and DCLA make the CDF process and other budget funding processes more inclusive and to ensure more BIPOC organizations gain funding?
So I think it's a question of both equity and equality, right? The city has to play catch up. So one thing that the deputy commissioner pointed out was a reform of the CDF process. It has yet to roll out, but we're very enthusiastic about the shifts that they have implemented, but we'll see how it goes, right? Like that's what we've yet to prove in how it is how it will impact the equity issues that we're talking about. But CDF is a competitive application that goes back to the first question that you asked, Chair, around access and resources and capacity in BIPOC organizations. So you're still you still have to have the staff, you still have to go in front of thousands of organizations that have perhaps more resources or are better able to maneuver the portal and their narratives. And so that CDF funding is still in some ways insecure. I know as the National Black Theater, who hasn't closed its doors in over a half century, I even at times, our organization at times have lost our CDF funding because of a competitive process. So I would say that there's a concern around equity in the process, but then we have to talk about equality. There is no baseline vehicle by which BIPOC organizations have secure and dedicated funding. So in the same way that the CIG, which have testified, do incredible and amazing work, so do CDF organizations. But the most threatened of those, as Lucy testified, are BIPOC organizations that through this last 2 years, we've already operated outside, like within the pandemic of racism. Then you layer it with the pandemic of COVID, and then we have a competitive process. So I would say finding transparent, baseline, secure, dedicated funding to BIPOC organizations is how we start, adding the word equality and catching up to where we know we need to be as a sector.
And I will just add that the last commissioner, Gonzalo Casals, and the DCLA staff did a lot of reforms at the end of their term, which were aimed towards things which we have long been asking for, multi-year funding. We didn't get this yet, but support for general operating, right? Not just program support, which is what organizations need. They need funding to just operate, to pay someone besides Sade to be here. They need that. And so I would say to continue to reform the DCLA in these ways that can increase access, and DCLA itself needs better funding because it frankly cannot, it doesn't have the staff itself to effectively execute these programs for the amount of funding that needs to go out.
And I would say that would be one of the biggest equity issues is the underfunding of DCLA. In order for them to be able to enact all of these things that we're talking about and to get the funds that BIPOC organizations more disproportionately lean on, getting funds to us in a timely fashion so that we're not taking out bridge loans. So we're not, all of the Band-Aids that we have to do to float ourselves until city funding comes in is a real issue. So equity is an issue in regards to how DCLA is funded, and it has been underfunded for far too long, and it affects us on the ground in real ways.
Thank you both. Christy?
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much to the panelists. We appreciate, as always, your testimony. Our next, before I call our next panel, I want to remind any council members, if you do have questions for the panelists, please feel free to use the Zoom raise hand function, and you will be called on in that order. Our next panel will consist of T. Greenidge from Cool Culture and Melody Capote. T. Greenidge, you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Good morning. My name is Tracy Greenidge. I am the Director of Development at Cool Culture, and this testimony is on the behalf of my organization and the thousands of New York City families who receive our free programs annually. I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to provide you with some insight into Cool Culture's work, our challenges, and successes. Cool Culture is a social justice organization that was established nearly 20 years ago. We use arts and culture to amplify the voices of marginalized communities, strengthen families, and contribute to community well-being. Our arts and cultural programs are created to build cross-cultural understanding, a movement for social change, and to help create a more equitable society. Our small staff of just 10 represent the diversity of New York City and work tirelessly to take these programs to more than 50,000 families who reflect the cultural diversity of our city. These families have children 0 to 6 years old registered at our network of 450 Title I schools in some of the most high-needs neighborhoods in the city and early childhood education centers. Many of our families face economic securities. Many are immigrants who feel uncomfortable signing up for the New York City ID card, which I have and never used, our largest comparable program. We connect our families to our wonderful network of cultural partners, some of which have been on this call. Thank you for calling us out and mentioning our deep relationship. To the committee, I know that you are facing incredibly difficult choices as you try to address the great and pressing needs that the city faces at this time. We are grateful for the groundwork that you have laid and your fight to ensure that the arts remain viable for all New Yorkers. We know that cultural resources are significantly linked to increased well-being and increased educational outcomes. Yet, historically marginalized communities face a stark reality of underinvestment, as has been mentioned, and systemic inequity when compared to affluent New Yorkers that continue to benefit from an array of the city's cultural and social economic resources. In the wake of the pandemic, we need to act now more than ever. At Cool Culture, we're doing this work along with our other cultural partners. Through our programs, we are supporting the well-being of communities. We're offering cultural access free every year. We are bringing families together, educators, teaching artists, and cultural workers to imagine and co-create new practices. We strongly urge you, along with our other partners and cultural institutions, to ensure the necessary support for arts and culture and to include the priorities of cultural organizations, particularly BIPOC-led institutions that have deep relationships with disenfranchised communities in the city. This support would enable Cool Culture and other arts organizations to continue to provide critical programs as many communities struggle through the city's recovery phase. I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Ms. Greenidge. And now we'll hear from Melody Capote. Ms. Capote, you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Mr. Chairman and members of the City Council, my name is Melody Capote, Executive Director of the Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute. Thank you for holding this oversight hearing on expanding access to cultural institutions for underserved BIPOC youth and the BIPOC community at large. I personally have a difficult time with the acronym BIPOC and will instead use people and organizations of color. CCCADI is a 45-year-old cultural institution that highlights and celebrates the creative expressions and cultural contributions of people of African descent, centered on equity, racial, and social justice. As we now approach the 2-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, since the murder, I have twice testified before this committee, and in each appearance, I asked the council to do something dramatic about the lack of cultural equity in the arts and culture community. I asked that you create a cultural equity fund that would allow Black and Brown organizations to begin catching up to those organizations with racial and economic privilege. Nothing has happened. We started an 18-month webinar training series for small and mid-sized arts and cultural organizations. It was an anti-racism training series. And 100 organizations with 200 executives were trained. 1 or 2 of these organizations are now doing amazing things to advance racial and social justice. The others, I don't know. But at City Council, nothing happened. A full 85% of DCLA's funding goes to large cultural institutions run and dominated by people with privilege. And because of that, something else did happen. Scores of small Black and Brown arts cultural organizations closed their doors, probably forever. It just doesn't make sense to call us every 6 months and ask us, how's it going? You want to know how it's going? Badly. And that will be true 6 months from now and 6 months from then, unless you and members of the City Council radically change the course. What does radically changing the course mean? First and foremost, it means the creation of it in the executive budget of a cultural equity fund that I propose be at least $1 million in order to allow communities of color to reclaim the fundamentals of culture that were taken from us through slavery, colonialism, and other forms of oppression. Understand, please, I am not just talking about enhancing the budgets of organizations led by communities of color. We are talking about the stripping of the culture of Black and Brown people and the denigration of that culture. Now, most visibly evidenced by the banning of books by racially paranoid segments of this population. It is not enough, apparently, to steal our music and call it your own, or our food, or our dancing, and the list goes on. Cultural equity has to do with leveling the playing field and making up for past transgressions. The Cultural Equity Fund would have 2 purposes. First, to increase the thrivability of organizations of colors with budgets of under $5 million. And second, to increase the number of organizations of color addressing racial and social justice and cultural equity issues within the arts and culture ecosystem. I dare say that organizations of color, when given resources similar to those to the economically privileged, we can do more, we outperform, and we do this on a regular basis. Second, artists of color, by and large, do not come from the conservatory, the academies, or the CUNY graduate school. Hip hop was born in the street. Graffiti converted to urban art was likewise born in the street. There needs to be a way, using continuing education methodology and structured technical assistance, to help artists and organizations of color to be effectively competitive in the marketplace. To do that will require an institution capable of constructing the bridge between continuing education and the street. CCCADI has served in that capacity and understands full well the difficulties that our artists have in the world of competitive grants. And so this capacity building and technical assistance academy would require an investment of $500,000 a year for a minimum period of 5 years. So I ask you, do you really want to make a timely BIPOC arts and culture oversight observation? Let's start here. Art heals. Art, music, dance, traditions, belief systems, all of which are part of the culture and the very things that are a part of culture and are the very things that heal a hurting society. What are we doing reserving these benefits only for those who can afford it or dress like they can? There are small to mid-sized organizations of color prepared to rise to the occasion if given the support needed to meet monthly operating bills. I have known executive directors who had to sit down and decide whether to pay themselves, pay their staff, or pay their vendors because all 3 could not be done that month. I know this because I have been one of those people. As I said when I was last here, our community needs you to put your money where your words are. If you want to do this work, don't just ask us to testify. Ask us to sit at the table as equal partners to reimagine and collaboratively negotiate the new package. Thank you for your time. And yes, Black Lives Matter.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank
Before
you.
we, Chair, I'll defer to
Sorry.
you. Defer
Yes,
to you, Chair.
thank you so much, Ms. Capote. Just want to give a reminder, if we could keep our testimonies to 2 minutes, that would be ideal. We do receive your written testimonies, and my staff definitely reviews that, but just for the sake of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Our next panel, well, before I call our next panel, if there are any council members present who have questions, please use the Zoom raise hand function. I'll announce our next panel will be Guy Yedweb, David Shukoff, Shahada Shea Salim, Francine Garber Cohen, and Cheryl Warfeld. Seeing no raised hands from council members, Guy Yedweb, you may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for this opportunity to speak today. I'm the president of the board of directors for the League of Independent Theater. We're an all-volunteer advocacy organization for workers and owners of 99-seat or less theaters across all 5 boroughs. These small-sized organizations are microcultural institutions, accessible not only for attendance, but for participation in every community. And I want to join in solidarity with the Cultural Solidarity Fund and the other calls that groups have brought today, but I want to speak about a specific piece of legislation that can help increase access to these small-sized cultural institutions throughout the city, and that's commercial rent stabilization. And you might be wondering why I'm speaking about commercial rent in this context, but the answer comes from Hugh Arts NYC's report that came out very recently that found that POC arts entities are often connected to a sense of place and neighborhood, but rarely have a truly stable space of their own. The report found that most POC arts entities currently rent space for their operations, operate exclusively online, or operate from home offices, and as such are often extremely vulnerable to high rents and quickly increasing rents from year to year. Commercial rent stabilization would, which was legislation that was introduced in the previous city council and is awaiting reintroduction, would protect and expand access to these micro institutions in 2 ways. First, for existing cultural institutions, they would have the reliability to know that their rent could only go up by a certain amount and that they couldn't be displaced by having rents that double or triple. So for example, one all Black and brown youth movement group called Educated Little Monsters lost its space precipitously when the rent that they were of the space that they were in was quickly driven up. This uproots groups from their neighborhoods, often closing them or leaving them.
Time expired.
Thank you. And just lastly, that this can also increase opportunities for new groups to find spaces by keeping rents on commercial spaces from spiraling out of control. There's further comments in my written testimony that will be submitted. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from David Shukoff. You may begin testifying when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to testify. I'm David Shukoff, Director of Education at Manhattan Theater Club. For more than 30 years, I'm sorry, I'm going to open my screen so you can see who's speaking. There we go. For more than 30 years, MTC Education has partnered extensively with alternative high schools and programs whose students generally come from historically underserved and under-resourced communities. Our programs bring students to the rich and diverse productions at our theaters after preparatory classroom workshops and enable students who have studied and attended those productions to write plays of their own, which are performed in their classrooms and auditorium by BIPOC professional artists. In addition, since the early 1990s, we have been providing playwriting residencies at East River Academy and Passages Academy, schools located within detention facilities, including Rikers Island. Throughout last year, we pivoted to a remote format, providing workshops via Zoom and video recordings of past MTC productions for students to view. As we all know, the pandemic has taken devastating toll on the city's youth. Enrollment and attendance last year, especially in alternative schools, plunged drastically. This year, enrollment is starting to creep back, but attendance is still highly erratic. Reliable research has shown that over time, arts programming from cultural organizations can dramatically improve attendance and engagement. And thanks to the 5- and 6-figure line items in school budgets this year dedicated to arts programming through the federal ARPA program, schools have an unprecedented capacity to pay for programs like ours. I echo the earlier call to this committee and to the City Council to do what it can to ensure that the unspent ARPA funds are carried over to next year's school budget, that the ARPA program itself continue beyond the present year, and to fully fund DCLA programs, grants, CASA, and similar budget lines so that all the city students can benefit from the robust arts education they deserve and so desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Shahada Shea Salim. You may begin as soon as the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Shahada Salim and I'm here representing the Intrepid Museum. Thank you to the committee and Chair Osei for the opportunity to speak today. As a senior manager of youth leadership and alumni programs, it is core to my role to welcome youth who are most excluded from positive STEM experiences, particularly girls who identify as BIPOC. For over a decade, I have run the museum's Goals for Girls program, a free 6-week summer STEM intensive for 50 girls. We also offer mentorship days where girls can be inspired by women, especially women of color, in STEM, a festival celebrating women in science and engineering, and paid internship opportunities. Over the years, the Goals program has impacted over 600 girls. This year, we received a grant to focus on the recruitment and support of Black and Latinas through Goals. The museum has also worked with colleagues to complete a National Science Foundation grant, which in part examines ways to support BIPOC girls on STEM and college and career paths. In addition, the museum serves nearly 30,000 young people through school trips, CASA programs, programs with DYCD sites, and more. The museum welcomes EBT card holders, plus 3 companions for free, and offers free admission to CUNY students. Last year, we finished a 2-year project partnering with NYCHA community members, nearly 95% of whom identify as non-white, on a guide for cultural institutions to build more meaningful relationships with low-income communities of color. This year, the museum is leading work to better surface the stories of BIPOC and LGBTQ+ and women service members. We are committed to an ongoing process of DEAI work, entailing reflection and reimagining of how we present content, hire and manage staff, and create connections with diverse communities. We are proud of our legacy of work to welcome and engage BIPOC youth and look forward to continuing and growing as a welcoming place for all. Thank you to the members of this committee and the councils and the City Council for the support you have given to the Intrepid Museum and our fellow cultural organizations for doing this work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Francine Garber-Cohen. You may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you for inviting us. I'm Fran Garber-Cohen, president of Regina Opera Company, a small budget organization. For 52 years, Regina Opera, based in Sunset Park, an underserved and low-income BIPOC community, has offered fully staged operas with a full orchestra and many free concerts in parks, libraries, festivals in Sunset Park, Bay Ridge, Borough Park, and other sections of Brooklyn. We provide affordable and free entertainment in accessible venues for audience members who may not otherwise attend live performances. The performances bring happiness and empathy to our audiences and bring people together, especially senior citizens, which make up about 65% of our audience. The need for this cultural enrichment is reflected in the fact that over 4,000 people usually attend our live performances each season. And we have had over 40,000 views of our online programming, allowing people who are avoiding public contact during COVID to still enjoy music. Due to COVID, Regina Opera lost all ticket income and most private sponsorships. From March 2020's shutdown until we were able to perform again free outdoors in May of 2021, we never gave up the task and joy of bringing happiness to others through music. During the pandemic, to date, Regina Opera has posted 40 videos of archived operas and newly recorded concerts, and relied upon public funding, especially that of council members, to keep our company alive. We at Regina Opera are now trying to bounce back, relying on the council funding and that of Department of Cultural Affairs. As a member of the public, as well as an arts producer, I would like to stress the critical need for support of arts and cultural organizations, all of which were devastated by COVID. We especially request increase in funding, which will be used for organizations serving communities that were hardest hit by COVID and are under-supported in general. Our New York City friends and neighbors, especially in low-income neighborhoods like Sunset Park, still suffer greatly. We owe it to these folks to help them to return to normal life in which arts and culture play a big part. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Cheryl Warfield. You may begin as soon as the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Cheryl, and committee members for hearing my testimony. I am Cheryl Warfield, a professional opera and Broadway singer, currently rehearsing at the Lyric Opera of Chicago in Fire Shut Up in My Bones, the first opera by a Black composer ever presented at the Metropolitan Opera last fall. I am also a K-12 teaching artist and run Advance More Opera, a nonprofit that presents concerts and free educational and cultural outreach to youth and families in underserved communities.
You may have a question.
More Opera is a participant of Culture at 3 meetings that receives no DCLA funding. Access to arts and culture for all is an issue of equity. Diverse perspectives from BIPOC artists and leaders should play a role in determining how best to expand access for those who need it most. In my experience, access to arts and culture is imperative for disadvantaged youth, as they often benefit from robust arts and cultural activities more than their counterparts privilege. Nearly 20 years ago, I presented my first opera residency at PS 91, the Albany Avenue School in Crown Heights. Concurrently, I presented the same program at a school on Staten Island in a more affluent, predominantly white school. While the students on Staten Island enjoyed the program and learned from it, it was the children in Crown Heights who found social and historical significance and meaning to the information that was presented to them. In 2020, during lockdown, my organization pivoted to virtual programming. Black Lives Matter, Songs for George, the music of protest, provided an emotional outlet for students to write music and lyrics about themselves and explore their feelings about what was going on in their world. Our program was what youth needed at the time, and my tiny organization made the commitment to provide it. Greater efforts to identify, coordinate, connect, and partner small BIPOC organizations to larger institutions can play a vital role in New York City's recovery and provide greater access and equity for youth in underserved communities. I'm grateful for all of your efforts to support arts and culture in New York. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
This concludes this panel, and I would like to remind any council members to use the raise hand function in Zoom if you have questions for anyone. In the meantime, I will move on to announce members of our next panel so they can begin to get ready. Our next panel will consist of Rachel Watts, Charles Rice Gonzalez, Arthur Aviles, and Paul Slee Rodriguez. Seeing no hands raised, I'm going to move on to Rachel Watts. You may begin your testimony as soon as the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair Osei, for the opportunity to share my testimony. In allocating resources to address inequities, the City Council must put faith in the arts and culture community to help process trauma, restore joy, and imagine ways to shift these power dynamics. My name is Rachel Watts, and I'm the Executive Director of Arts Connection, which is an NYC-based arts education organization whose core purpose for over 40 years has been to elevate the diverse cultural and artistic resources of the city and connect young people and their families with uplifting experiences that respect who they are as humans. Since 2011, we have been engaged deeply in DEIA work, and we currently work in over 100 public schools throughout the city each year, directly with young people and with families during out of school time. Our work lies at the intersection of culture, education, arts, community development, and occurs in all 5 boroughs. In schools, currently, because of the American Rescue Plan Act, which is the academic recovery funding, we are seeing an increase in the amount of work we are able to do. This allows us to bring depth to our programming and thus increase student impact in schools that otherwise would not have the resources to do so. We are working hard now, knowing that the looming question of what happens next year when this funding is no longer available continues to haunt us. There are a lot of questions earlier about access and access for BIPOC-led organizations to funding and to resources. We recently launched a program called Culture Connected as a bridge to the amazing cultural institutions that the city has to offer. While centering families who are SNAP benefit recipients, Culture Connected's design ensures every family looking for ways to optimize museums, cultural institutions for their personal enrichment can do so through our site.
Time expired.
www.cultureconnected.org. We're underscoring inclusivity to decrease the stigma of not having the resources to pay. We are helping build confidence and excitement in live programming and engagement with our partners in person. We are working with partners on all 5 boroughs, not just CIGs that are BIPOC-led. We actually have funding that for the next 18 months that allows us to help them develop the education programming that they can put on this site for only 18 more months. After that, we need support in finding ways to continue to bring the work of BIPOC-led and cultural organizations that are smaller to the forefront and make it accessible to our community of young people. Our request is the decisions about budgets that take into account work like organizations like Arts Connection. We are supported by DCLA and finding more ways for the DCLA to provide these sorts of activities for organizations like Arts Connection. Thank you for the opportunity to testify at this time.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Ms. Watts. Next, we'll hear from Charles Rice Gonzalez. You may begin testifying when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you so much. I'm Charles Rice Gonzalez. I'm the co-founder of BAD, the Bronx Academy of Arts and Dance, and you'll hear from my colleague Arthur Vilas about our organization. But I'm here today as a founding member of LXNY, the Latin Arts Consortium of New York, a collaborative of peer network dedicated to knowledge exchange, resource sharing, and a collective action towards systemic change. At the height of the pandemic, the Clemente, Perdones PRTT, and BAD learned of a group of New York City arts organizations, mostly white-led, who sent a letter to foundations for support because they feared the pandemic could sink them. They were given a few million with no questions asked. When we got a group together and did the same action, we didn't get the same response. And therein lies the rub of inequity. So we formed LXNY because there was a bigger issue. We own our great value to the artistic landscape of the city, but the optic was not shared. We've rolled up our sleeves as organizations serving Latinx communities and artists across New York City to transform the historical underfunding of Latinx arts by advocating for the equity-driven missions of our cultural institutions, nurturing our deep relationships with community, and stewarding our hard-fought legacies into the future. Our work is essential work. And from a founding group of 8 orgs, we are now a network of over 30 organizations. LXNY is part of a movement that was catapulted by the cultural equity groups and forwarded by Mosaic and the Hugh Arts, which was recently launched. We're working in tandem to shift the needle and increase support for BIPOC orgs and serving BIPOC audiences. We've got the data, we've got the legacy, and we've got a deep sense of our value. Now we need the playing field to be level and equitable to receive the funding that will jettison a transformation of BIPOC lives. We call on DCLA to begin reporting publicly on its funding distribution by borough, neighborhood, and organization size so that we can hold the city accountable to the pledges on equity. To address the city's underfunding of the arts overall and biparts orgs in particular, the city should correct this through radical increases, not only taking funding, but not taking funding from larger organizations, but adding funding for the funded neighborhoods and BIPOC-led organizations. And DCLA should make processes easier for smaller organizations to apply, especially giving multi-year operating costs and direct funding to individual artists, especially BIPOC artists. So we thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Arthur Aviles. Arthur, you may begin your testifying when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you to Councilmember Chi Alsay and your committee. I'm Arthur Aviles, co-founder of BAD, the Bronx Academy of Arts and Dance, and I'm proud to be a part of this beautiful cross-section of arts organizations here. So BAD serves BIPOC communities and artists by design. We transform the lives of women, people of color, and the LGBTQ+ communities through dance, arts, education, culture, and for 23 years, BAD's been a home for the freedom of creative expression and presents annual festivals like the Badass Women Festival and the Black Latinx Performance Series. BAD's artists, residents, they are nurtured, choreographers and artists in their creative process. We have our education programs, AATT Academy, which is innovative dance instruction for 6 to 9-year-olds. And since 2001, over 7,000 artists have shared their work with over 50,000 audience members. That's a BIPOC organization. BAD has been crowned a funky and welcoming space by the New York Times. And BAD is a founding organization of LXNY. And we want to punctuate that the city underfunds the arts overall and BIPOC communities and organizations in particular. The city should correct this inequity through radical increases, not by taking funding away from larger organizations, but by adding funding to underfunded neighborhoods and BIPOC-led and servicing organizations. We need much more funds overall, not a redistribution of existing funds. So I thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Paul Slee Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez, you may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you to Chair Osei and committee members for this opportunity to testify and for running a frequently joyous hearing. My name is Paul Slee Rodriguez, and I serve as Executive Director of International Arts Relations, also known as INTAR. And I'm also board president of the Hispanic Organization of Latin Actors. We are all part of LXNY as well, and we heartily endorse everything that has been said prior to my comments. Regarding INTAR was founded in 1966 to give Latin theater artists in New York City an artistic home and opportunities to create and perform our own stories, which by definition dignify and bear witness to our complex realities. We have launched generations of artists into the mainstream of dramatic arts in the USA. In 2003, Nilo Cruz became the first Latino playwright to receive a Pulitzer Prize for drama. He first developed his craft in our Hispanic Playwrights Residency Lab with training from Maria Irene Fornés, herself one of the most influential playwrights of her generation. INTAR continues to thrive today. We have an actor training program for non-union actor graduates of 3 area public universities, Queensborough Community College, Queens College, and Montclair State University in New Jersey, to train and encourage their entry into Actors Equity, the Stage Actors Union. We just began a director's fellowship for young Latin stage directors that guarantees production of a play of their choosing and commissioning funds for a playwright to develop the play with them in our theater. Last June, due to COVID and through critical support from the Coalition of Theaters of Color initiative, we were able to present a new rock musical on the street in front of our building at 500 West 52nd Street in Hell's Kitchen called Oso Fabuloso and the Barebacks. And it was a celebration of gay bear culture and through the lens of a failed romance. The critical and audience success of that production has led to additional productions in the fall And this spring, we're going to present it on March 24th
Have
at
expired.
Joe's Pub. I want to say that our biggest challenge right now is our space, which is a city-owned space. It's owned by HPD and is falling apart around us. We have no HVAC, which makes it very difficult to present under COVID, if not impossible. And basically, there's a mold problem due to water leaks. And I would love to work with members of this committee and with our nonprofit building management company, Clinton Housing Development Company, to work on a solution and move us, as Clinton Housing has planned, to a new facility at 545 West 52nd, also city-owned. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I would like to remind council members with questions for anyone that's just testified on this panel to please use the raise Zoom hand function. In the meantime, let me announce our next panel. Kimberly Olson, Mino Laura, Yano Cortillo, Shelby Green, and Tracy Lester. Seeing no hands raised, Kimberly Olson, you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chair Osei and members of the City Council for your leadership and commitment to the arts and arts education. My name is Kimberly Olson, and I'm the Executive Director of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable, as well as the teaching artist working at P396K in Brownsville. The Roundtable is a nonprofit service organization working to improve and advance arts education in New York City schools and beyond. Our 130 plus member organizations, many whom are here today, have worked in longstanding partnership with the Department of Education to ensure that every child has access to quality arts learning. We believe that arts education is a right for all New York City students, especially those that identify as BIPOC. As you've heard today, world-class arts and arts education are happening across our city in all 5 boroughs. Yet these resources and opportunities are only available to some of New York City's 1 million students. In this great city, we have not yet defined how to sustain arts education for all. Underinvestment in arts education in New York City has been recurrent. Prior to COVID, 67% of principals noted that funding for the arts was generally insufficient. Only 34% of middle schoolers were meeting NYSED requirements. 17% of schools lack certified arts teachers, and almost 30% of schools no longer work with at least one cultural organization. On top of this, COVID-related budget cuts immediately stripped away resources from those already underfunded opportunities. The need for investment in arts education access has never been more clear. The trauma, systemic racism, and learning loss related to COVID-19 are stark realities that BIPOC students are currently facing every day. By prioritizing arts education, our city can help ensure that our young people have the rigor, encouragement, and inspiration they need to thrive in today's world. As the city continues to adjust to our ever-changing dynamics and challenges, the Roundtable calls on you, our City Council, to take action towards making quality arts education in every school and community a reality. This means continuing partnership programs between the Department of Education and DCLA, like Summer Rising.
Time expired.
It also means continuing the American Rescue Plan Act academic recovery funding towards the arts, which gives us a temporary on-ramp to equity and access for the arts. And lastly, but most importantly, it means working with the Department of Education to reinstate required funding for arts learning to ensure sustainability beyond the pandemic. If we don't invest in arts education now, then when? Our BIPOC students need and deserve an equitable education that includes the arts. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Mino Laura. You may begin testifying when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you so much. Buenas tardes a todos. My name is Mino Laura, and I'm the founding executive director of People's Theater Project. Councilmember Osei and committee members, thank you so much for hosting this hearing today. And thank you for your leadership on behalf of arts and communities of color as we approach this pandemic's 2nd anniversary. I'm testifying today on behalf of People's Theater Project and as a steering committee member of the Latinx Arts Consortium of New York, with some of my fellow colleagues and arts leaders are here today. At People's Theater Project, we create theater with and for immigrant communities to build a more just and equitable world. We are an immigrant and POC Latina-led organization at every level of our governance, and we are trusted by our neighbors of all ages in Washington Heights, Inwood, and the Bronx. We know, so many of us here in this room, I think, agree that theater is a powerful tool for social justice. At People's Theater Project, we serve almost 1,000 immigrant youth and BIPOC children every year through our Academy for Leadership, Theater, and Activism and our school partnerships. We also bring multilingual performances throughout New York City with our professional arm. Over the years, we've partnered with city agencies to do civic and educational programs with MOYA, DOE, and the Manhattan DA's office. In the summer of 2020, right after the racial uprisings, we brought together over 1,000 marchers for the Children's March for Black Lives as co-organizers, where speakers were all between the ages of 4 and 18 Black and brown youth who wrote poems and sang and performed, engaging and galvanizing all of us. It's important for us to remember today that the creative economy generates over $110 billion in economic activity for our city. But it cannot be overstated, as we have heard today, that the city underfunds the arts overall, and especially communities of color and BIPOC organizations. We can't be constantly scrambling to find money, which is why you join so many of my colleagues today with these demands. We know that funding is inequitable, and we know that DCLA has made inroads. But we need to be accounting and making sure that the public funding we have data and it's public so that we can make sure to make ourselves and make DCLA accountable to that equity. We also need to increase the funding. And again, I join in it's not about taking away from CIGs and other organizations, but establishing baseline funding specifically for BIPOC organizations and designated $100 million in cultural equity, as Melody Capote mentioned before, and she agrees, and so many of us with the Museum Q advocated. We have an amazing opportunity, and you as City Council have an amazing opportunity to do a radical change in our city by investing in organizations of color. And at People's Theater Project, we are ready to collaborate with you to find creative solutions to make this a reality. So, pa'lante, let's make it happen. Gracias.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Yano Cortillo. You may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
It looks like we have been separated temporarily from Yano Cortillo, so we'll move on to Shelby Green. Shelby, you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chair Osei and members of the Committee on Cultural Affairs. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you on the cultural needs of the BIPOC community. I'm Shelby Green, Chair of the Board of Trustees of the Brooklyn Music School, BMS. BMS has been serving the Fort Greene and the larger Brooklyn community for more than 110 years. Its founding principle is that music and performing arts instruction is the birthright of all, irrespective of means or origin. When BMS began, it offered music lessons at 30 cents per. And the BMS has always and continues to live up to this principle through the vast array of music, dance, and other performance offerings on site and in the community. More than 60% of students receive reduced tuition or no-cost lessons for our already below market rate offerings. More than 50% of the mini classes and up to 90% of other classes are comprised of BIPOC students. Starting with me, more than half the Board of Trustees, teachers, and staff identify as people of color or of diversity. BMS offers music and performing arts instruction in all genres, from hip hop to Motown to jazz to cabaret to opera. The offerings reflect the interests of the diverse democracy that defines Fort Greene and Brooklyn. BMS has outreach programs in public schools and many school districts and other institutions around the city. And there are more than 40 different programs and workshops being offered. Some recent programs include a Cultural Immigrant Initiative partnership with IS 291, in which there is a 12-week Afro-Caribbean drumline instructional program. There is the In Our Art, a Catalyst for Change anti-gun partnership with MS 352, which runs the Beats for Peace program. We have songwriting workshops centering on the words of Martin Luther King.
I'm expired.
We also have the BMS Summer Institute, a wildly popular 6-week intensive program for students 5 to 8, a full day program. We have for middle and high school students, BMS Summer Intensive, which includes hip hop intensives, strings intensive, dance intensives, and musical theater. So while BMS has the heart and commitment to continue its role as a cultural driver of the community, its financial resources are strained and its existing physical spaces is wearing down. The ailing 100-year-old row houses that make up the existing facility not only constrains use, but they constrain BMS's capacity for creativity. They were made for living in, but not designed for music instruction. So happily, BMS has plans to acquire a new 20,000 square foot space next door on the grounds floors of a proposed new mixed use, mixed income project, which is going to offer at least 30% affordable housing units, which we are tentatively calling this new facility the BMS Community Performing Arts Center, which will serve as a facility that will host and serve as the anchor for other not-for-profit community arts programs. But the tokens that we receive for our services surely are inadequate to support the construction of this new facility and to continue our operations. So we really need continuing robust and fulsome support from this committee and the city in order for the BMS Community Performing Arts Center to be born and to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Tracy Lester. Tracy, you may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present testimony to the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. And thank you, Chair Osei. I'm Tracy Lester, the Executive Director of the Center for Fiction, and I'm here to speak about the Center for Fiction's Kids Read, Kids Write program. I'm also the Vice Chair of the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable. The mission of the Center for Fiction, located in Fort Greene, Brooklyn at 15 Lafayette Avenue, is to bring diverse communities together as readers and writers to develop and share a passion for fiction and storytelling in all its forms. As Ralph Ellison said, good fiction is made of what is real, and reality is difficult to come by. As Richard Wright once said, whenever my environment had failed to support or nourish me, I had clutched at books. Fiction elicits our sense of wonder. It also helps us to escape, especially during times such as these. For over 200 years, the Center for Fiction has played a vital role in the literary life of New York City. Starting as the Mercantile Library of New York in 1821, the organization hosted a range of programming from lectures on arts and culture to developing a book ordering and delivery system decades before the first public library was built. Today, we are known as the Center for Fiction, and I'm the first leader of color in the 200-year history of the organization. Our programming spotlights authors and artists. These include our public events where more than 150 authors and artists are featured annually, our Kids Read and Kids Write programming where we work with New York City public school children grades 3 to 12, our Emerging Writer Fellowships, awards, and reading groups and writing workshops for adults. Through all of these programs, the Center for Fiction supports the creation and enjoyment of fiction in a creative and collaborative, diverse environment for readers and writers of all ages and backgrounds. There have been great strides in the world of fiction, but championing fiction as an art is still crucial. That's why City Council funding is critical for programs like ours, which connect New York City public school students, the majority of whom are Black and Brown children, with diverse artists and authors, providing access to works that engage with them on a personal level. In order for children to connect with fiction in a personal way and to dream big, there need to be books that reflect their diverse readership, and they need to connect with authors who represent people of color, ethnic minorities, non-binary gender identities, and a diversity of sexual orientations and abilities. As with so many of our peers in the cultural arena, the Center for Fiction sustained devastating losses from the COVID pandemic. And as we begin to reemerge from the pandemic, it is only with ongoing support from government, foundations, individuals that we can look forward to becoming once again the lively cultural locus for our community. We thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Ms. Lester. Again, I'd like to remind any council members who have questions for this particular panel to use the Zoom raise hand function.
Yeah, Christy, just wanted to chime in again for future panelists. Just a reminder to please keep your testimonies to 2 minutes. We do receive your written testimonies, and our staff definitely takes time to read them all and review them. But please keep your testimonies to 2 minutes.
Thank you much. Thank you so much, Chair. Sorry. Our next panel, our final panel, and thank you all for being so patient. Last but not least is Lindsay Buller Malaikal. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name. Dominic Hood, Dr. Manuel A. Moran, Rosalind Barber, and Atiba T. Edwards. Following their testimony, I will be going back and making sure that we haven't overlooked anyone. Lindsay Buller Malaikal, you'll be able to start testifying when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Time starts now.
Hello, thank you so much for the opportunity to provide testimony today. I am Lindsay Buller Malaikal with the New 42 New Victory Theater, where we are committed to the performing arts being part of everyone's life from the earliest years on. And we do this through how we support New York City kids, young adults, and artists of color. In a regular season, pre-COVID, we are the largest provider of live performing arts in New York City, serving about 40,000 students year-round and heavily subsidizing tickets for an additional 60,000 kids and families on the weekend. And since March 16th, 2020, the New Victory also created hundreds of free videos for educators and parents, currently viewed by over 2 million people during the pandemic. Since we are a larger organization, we also think we have a large responsibility to ensure that all New Yorkers have a right to the arts. So for 8 years, the New Victory has been the DOE partner for theater in the Create Professional Learning track for 3K and 4K classrooms. To date, we have directly served over 3,000 educators across all 5 boroughs, bringing the arts to over 20,000 of our youngest children. We've also partnered with other arts education organizations like Community Word Project and Arts Connection, you heard from Rachel earlier, to create the Give Guide that ensures that all of the teaching artists working in New York City have been trained and can successfully differentiate instruction across students' socio-emotional, cognitive, physical, and behavioral capacities. We also run the Youth Corps, which is a creative youth development program that offers New Yorkers ages 16 and older a pathway of support through high school, through college, as a partnership with the CUNY Cultural Corps, and all the way into professional arts careers. The goal is that by any young New Yorker who comes to the New Victory Theater is also welcomed by another young New Yorker who reflects the large, rich diversity of our city. We are one of the largest performing arts providers of youth employment. So in creating a theater that is home to all of New York City's young people, it is important to have the city's BIPOC kids, teens, and young adults feel a sense of belonging in the historic theater. And so to that end, we also do Lab Works, which is focused on creating new diverse canon of theater for young people. The Lab Works artists all identify as Black, Indigenous, and/or people of color. The New York City Council has a crucial role in creating equity toward all New Yorkers, and the cultural arts sectors are your partners in this responsibility. And we look forward to partnering with you to continue to provide these services. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Dominic Hood. You may begin testifying when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the chair for letting my institution speak. I'm here to represent the historic Richmond town. I would like to first just thank the chair and other members present for allowing my smaller institution this time to speak. I rise today to present testimony on behalf of historic Richmond town to this committee regarding expanding access to our cultural institutions for our fellow Black and Indigenous New Yorkers. Our institution has made great strides in the past decade to expand our programming, to enrich and educate our visitors on all who called our borough home. But unearthing and teaching the history of marginalized groups, which has for many centuries been buried and suppressed by the cultural elite of this city, is not an easy nor simple task. Our curators and educators have found constant gaps in family histories, an incredible dearth of property and sales records, as well as an almost systemic resistance within our city's past history to even acknowledge such New Yorkers. Yet how many problems of humanity have been helped through by the lessons of our past? Thus, how much unknown answers and how much wisdom has been buried that we are now sitting upon from the unknown lives of our fellow Black and Indigenous New Yorkers. This work we speak of today is incredibly vital, and I am incredibly proud to introduce this cultural institution to the new members of this committee under the mantle of our current leadership, who have for years fought against the instinctual aversion and embedded resistance all too common on the roads of progress. During the very height of the pandemic, we launched the Staten Island Historical Society's new in-depth and all-encompassing African-American focus tour, and are soon to break ground on our borough's first authentic, full-size installation of Indigenous Lenape-Munsee home building and their way of life. The cultural institution I rise to testify on behalf of today is certainly one of the smallest of the cultural institutions groups. We bear no undue pride and hold no claim to be the preeminent jewel upon our city's crown, but rather a keen determination to be the soldering which keeps this network of learning through our history together. What we would ask of the council is to help us connect Black and Indigenous students in other districts with the expansive historical campus, our engaging and warm-hearted educators, and the ambitious new programming we have fought for years to bring into this new decade on Staten Island. Thank you all so very much, and we look forward to working with you soon.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Manuel A. Moran. You may begin testifying when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Hi, I am the founder and artistic director of Teatro SEA. We are a proud member of the Alliance of Teatros Latinos New York and also members of the Latinx Art Consortium. First and foremost, I want to thank you for this opportunity and for your service and support. The work that you do is extremely valuable and often goes unacknowledged. Thank you especially for the partnerships that you have developed over the years with our organization and my colleagues. Unfortunately, without your support, many of our kids and youth of our communities of color throughout the city will remain underserved. SEA, or Society of the Educational Arts, better known as SEA, we are New York's only Latino children's theater and perhaps the only Latino children's theater in the nation. We're celebrating 37 years of bringing the arts to underserved communities in the city. Even though we are located at District 1, we are a citywide organization that has worked and continues to work in the 5 boroughs. Through programs like the Three Kings Day Festival, Borimix Puerto Rico Fest, the Puppet Fringe Festival, Arte Pa' Mi Gente Festival, school art residencies, and many other programs, we are promoting and preserving Latin American rich cultural heritage for the immigrant, Latinx, Spanish-speaking communities, as well as introducing non-Spanish-speaking families to Latino arts and culture. However, many of these communities often go without any programming due to funds not being fairly distributed. My question then becomes why? Why are communities and organizations that serve them are so underfunded, while organizations that do not represent or provide for this community receive large amounts of funds? Take our case, for example. Our CDF-based funding since 1999 has been $15,000. 23 years have passed and we still receive the same amount. We're thankful for the grant. However, our organization has grown, not to mention that it's quite unique. Our budget, programs, audiences have grown tremendously. Before the pandemic, we did over 200 performances a year and worked with hundreds of schools. Well, I need 2 minutes, 1 second. I do acknowledge that DCLA in the past have tried many different approaches to distribute funds more equitably, and I applaud those efforts, but still not enough. Organizations of colors are still underfunded. More than ever, we are in great need. The pandemic has been devastating to all, and communities of colors have been hit the most, and kids are hurt and they are in terrible need. The arts are essential to help heal. Anyway, I want to say that I know that the City Council is committed to equity and fairness, and you have a great responsibility and a huge task to change many years of neglect and unfair funding practices for organizations like mine. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we will hear from Rosalind Barber. Rosalind, you may begin as soon as the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
My name is Rosalind Barber, Administrative Chief of Staff at the Public Theater. Thank you to Chair Osei and the members of the committee for calling today's hearing. The Public Theater is a proud member of the Cultural Institutions Group. Over the past few years, the work of the public has been transformed by the COVID-19 pandemic. And yet, despite the many challenges our sector faces, the Public Theater has continued to make its work available to the people of the City of New York through free and low-cost programming occurring in all 5 boroughs. We are known for Free Shakespeare in the Park, our new plays and musicals performed downtown, and Joe's Pub, as well as our community programs. One of those programs, celebrating its 5th year, is the Public Shakespeare Initiative, which includes our education program, Hunts Point Children's Shakespeare Ensemble. The ensemble was co-founded by the Shakespeare Society with the Hunts Point Alliance for Children over a decade ago, and has offered hundreds of elementary and middle school students the opportunity to develop their confidence, knowledge, and creativity through the transformative experience of bringing Shakespeare's words to life on stage. As stated on the Hunts Point Alliance website, Hunts Point is home to over 4,000 children whose families struggle to plan for their futures, often lacking access to the resources they need to live healthy, fulfilled lives. Hunts Point children are disproportionately affected by the barriers to quality education and basic needs. In fact, 54% of Hunts Point children live in poverty, with 27% of community families living on less than $15,000 a year. The public is proud to be in partnership with Hunts Point Alliance to serve the Hunts Point community and to provide free programming for their constituents. A new season of the Hunts Point Children's Shakespeare Ensemble started in October 2021 and will culminate in May 2022 with a production of a play from the Shakespeare canon. The ensemble meets 3 times a week for 8 months with up to 60 students, working with a team of theater professionals to make Shakespeare's original text their own. In partnership with the Hunts Point Alliance for Children, this longstanding program supports young people in developing social and emotional confidence while strengthening their practical skills such as public speaking, listening, creativity, and teamwork. I want to state the public's support for the request made by Sade Lithcott, Lucy Sexton, and others here today for the City Council to support the Cultural Equity Fund and the Cultural Plan for Recovery. We're proud to be in partnership with Hunts Point, but we recognize the public's privilege in having the financial resources to undertake this work and know that partnerships like ours do not holistically address the systemic challenges faced by BIPOC-led organizations, which is why we asked for the council to fight for the Cultural Equity Fund. Thank you again for holding this hearing today to explore this topic.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Our next panelist will be Atiba T. Edwards, followed by Rocky Bucano and Sarah Bukowski. Atiba, you may begin testifying as soon as the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, Chair Osei and members of the committee. My name is Atiba Edwards, and I'm the COO and Executive Vice President at Brooklyn Children's Museum. I also serve as the committee chair for the Cultural Institutions Group Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Committee, further here called IDEA. I'm here to provide testimony on behalf of the CIGs, a coalition of 34 cultural organizations who share a public-private partnership in New York and are located across all the 5 boroughs, employing approximately 11,500 with additional 8,000 volunteers. I want to start off by saying how grateful we are for the Council's vital support for culture and the arts in New York City throughout the years, and especially for calling today's hearing on this important topic. The IDEA Committee last year focused on workforce development so that we can provide playbook strategies and guides that emphasize and outline the infrastructure and systems to strengthen and diversify New York City's cultural organizations. We really focused on workforce development because that's an integral part of expanding access to the BIPOC community, and one that goes just simply beyond just hiring the staff, but really focused on developing, supporting them so that they can rise through those ranks and adjust some of the percentages you opened up giving out in terms of where BIPOC staff is within each cultural organization. I do want to share some recent examples of CIG support through the employment of the BIPOC youth and BIPOC communities. At Brooklyn Children's Museum, we've been running a many-year-long Teens Coalition cohort program that gives paid stipends to high school teens in quarterly cohorts to give them access to cultural studies, understanding how collections are created, and also maintaining the use of art as a form of activism. This program gives teens a first-way entry into the work and the potential that they can have while working within cultural organizations. At Weeksville, they had a programming called You're Here, You're Right, and Celebration of Culture that further created space to celebrate hairstyles and textures that are typically associated with the Black people and Black cultures, and it was held in partnership with the New York City Human Rights Law to protect New Yorkers from race, religious discrimination based on hair, while celebrating cultural heritage. We deeply appreciate the Council's unwavering support and ask that you ensure resources dedicated toward continued and improved access to the cultural and arts communities hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. That's the BIPOC youth and BIPOC communities at large. We especially want to highlight today that the recent proposed budget by the mayor, and would like to express that the cultural community cannot thrive without continued investment by the city. As a collective, the CIGs are asking that culture be held harmless, all of culture being held harmless. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and we look forward to our continued partnership with this great city and your valued leadership through and beyond these crises.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Rocky Bucano. Mr. Bucano, you may begin as soon as the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, Chairman Osei and members of the City Council. Congratulations, Chairman Osei, on your new role as Chair of the Cultural Affairs in the City Council. I look forward to helping you advance a more diverse, sustainable, and more equitable future for New York City's cultural institutions. My name is Rocky Buchanan. I'm the President and Executive Director of the Universal Hip Hop Museum, New York City's newest cultural institution, which is currently under construction at the Bronx Point development in the Mott Haven section of the Bronx. The journey to build a permanent home to document, preserve, and celebrate hip hop's cultural contributions to the world began 12 years ago next month. Hip hop is uniquely New York and is distinctly America's greatest cultural export. Hip hop has always been and still is the voice of the voiceless. It is the culture of the disenfranchised. Hip hop's influence is seen everywhere from film and television to activism and politics. Hip hop has been used by BIPOC communities around the world to preserve tribal language and is presently used in urban cities across the country to engage students in STEAM-based educational programs. Hip hop is the fabric of today's global economy. I've advocated for a permanent home for hip hop for New York City for many years. I fought hard during the past 12 years to make sure that the Universal Hip Hop Museum's future home is located in the Bronx where the culture originated. It could not be located any other place and be true to the history of hip hop. In May 2021, the Universal Hip Hop Museum broke ground on its 53,000 square foot state-of-the-art home at the Bronx Point. I am proud that the UHHM now serves as the cultural anchor of New York City's largest affordable housing project. Since the UHHM journey began, the organization has produced a variety of educational, cultural, and social justice programs serving BIPOC students and families across the 5 boroughs. The UHHM's Revolution of Hip Hop exhibit located at the Bronx Terminal Market has been a great delivery platform for our educational and cultural programs. Since opening in 2019, the Revolution of Hip Hop has greeted tens of thousands of visitors from around the world and has become a favorite educational resource for middle school, high school, and college educators. This year, the UHHM is producing a hip hop physics program for New York City's middle school and high school students led by Dr. Stefan Alexander, author of the book Fear of a Black Universe. The UHHM is also using its high profile to create a new social impact program called Shoot Cameras, Not Guns, designed to help reduce the increase in gun violence that is committed by both young men and young women who live in under-resourced communities. Our educational and social impact programs will inspire, empower, and uplift the city's most vulnerable young men and young women. We are seeking the support of the City Council for capital funding and discretionary funding to elevate our programs and bring the construction of the museum to the finish line. I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Our final panelist will be Sarah Cecilia Bukowski. You may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Hello, folks. My name is actually Alejandra Duque Cifuentes, speaking on behalf of Sarah Cecilia Bukowski. I'm the Executive Director of Dance NYC, the service organization for the dance industry in the New York City area. Thank you for holding this hearing to address BIPOC access to culture. There are several issues that impact BIPOC access to culture. Not having access to organizations or art where they live or go to school, not seeing themselves represented in the organizations and businesses that serve them, not being able to join the pipeline of work in arts and culture either by not seeing themselves represented or not having access to training or community and financial support. If they do join the workforce, not being able to stay in the workforce due to poor wages or obstacles that exist for BIPOC orgs to thrive and remain open. And of course, the effects of white supremacist structures. Therefore, Dance NYC requests the following: the establishment of a cultural equity fund to baseline support to BIPOC-led orgs and serving orgs, to continue to make reforms to the CDF process to ensure that general operating support is provided, appropriate technical assistance when applying, and to ensure that DCLA is properly staffed and paid to carry out that work. The establishment of $100 million to fund BIPOC-led serving cultural entities to address gaps in cultural equity, property ownership, and land stewardship. And in the meantime, the expansion of the cultural institutions group to include more BIPOC-led entities, which have shown us as a model that allows folks to thrive, and to reinstate arts and culture as a core subject in schools, and the prioritization of funding for the Department of Education Office of Arts and Special Project Strategic Arts Plan. And most importantly, the establishment of a reparations framework through the city's Racial Justice Commission. We continue to talk about the way in which we want to support BIPOC workers and BIPOC organizations and BIPOC folk to access culture, but we can't do it if we're not both funding their immediate needs and the institutions that allow them to thrive, as well as the historic under-resourcing of those communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Before we move forward, I would like to remind any council members who have questions for this panel to please use the Zoom raise hand function. You'll be called on in the order in which you've raised your hand. I also would like to make a comment here. If we've inadvertently missed anyone that would like to testify, please use the Zoom raise hand function and we will call on you that in the order that your hand is raised. I'm seeing no council member hands. I'm seeing no members of the public. I would like to say that we have concluded public testimony for this hearing. I want to thank everyone for your testimony, and I'd like to now turn back to the chair for any closing remarks and then to close the hearing. Chair Osei.
Thank you, Christy. I just wanted to say to Mr. Busano that I will only see that project open up in the Bronx if you admit that the best hip hop comes from Central Brooklyn / Bed-Stuy. But without, before further remarks, I want to thank everyone who testified at this hearing today, and to thank all the advocates and organizations who provide arts and culture to our city. The work that you all do is crucial to a city that is rich in history, culture, and diversity. I look forward to working with each and every single one of you to ensure and expand accessibility of all of our cultural institutions to our BIPOC communities. This conversation does not start and end with this hearing. It is an ongoing work that we have to engage in. The time is now 1:16 p.m. and the hearing has ended. I have a gavel.